Here's something they don't tell you when you first meet Shadowheart on that burning beach. She's been torturing her own parents for decades, and she has no idea. Let that sink in for a moment. This woman, this cleric of darkness who guards her mysterious artifact with paranoid devotion, spent years perfecting interrogation techniques on prisoners in a Sharan temple beneath Baldur's gate. Among those prisoners were Arnell and Emmeline Hallowleaf, the loving Selûnite couple who raised a daughter named Jenevelle in the forest outside the city. Shadowheart doesn't remember them because a device called the Mirror of Loss surgically removed 50 years of memories, transforming a child of moonlight into a weapon of shadow. But here's the truly twisted part. Shar, the goddess of loss, orchestrated this specifically because Jenevelle was a Selûnite. The Lady of Darkness wanted to prove that even those raised in her sister's light could be claimed, broken, and turned into instruments of despair. And Lae'zel, the fierce githyanki warrior who demands respect and spits contempt at everyone she considers inferior, she serves a queen who devours the souls of her greatest warriors to sustain her undead existence. Vlaakith is a leech who has ruled for over 1,000 years by consuming the very heroes she claims to honor, killing them the moment they become powerful enough to potentially threaten her throne. Lae'zel doesn't know this. She's been taught that being chosen by Vlaakith for soul consumption is the highest honor a githyanki can achieve. The truth is that her entire civilization is built on a lie so profound it makes Shar's manipulation of Shadowheart look almost merciful by comparison. These two women meet on the ravaged beach near Baldur's gate in the year 1492, survivors of a nautiloid crash that should have killed them both. They don't like each other. They don't trust each other. And neither of them understands that they're about to unravel secrets that gods and queens have spent millennia trying to bury. This is where our journey truly begins. When the nautiloid crashes near the river Kiontha, the debris field becomes a meeting ground for two women whose fates are more intertwined than either could possibly imagine. Shadowheart stumbles from the wreckage, still clutching the Astral Prism, an artifact she was sent to steal from the githyanki. Lae'zel emerges furious, scanning for weapons, her mind consumed with one thought: recovering the artifact that was stolen from her people. Neither woman knows what's actually inside that artifact. Neither understands the cosmic joke that fate or the gods have arranged. The prism contains Prince Orpheus, the rightful heir to the githyanki throne and the son of the legendary Gith who freed her people from mind flayer slavery. Based on what githyanki legends tell us, Orpheus inherited his mother's unique ability to disrupt elder brain control, a psionic mutation that makes him incredibly dangerous to illithids and incredibly valuable to anyone fighting them. But here's what makes this situation so perfectly, cruelly ironic. The artifact's power to protect against seramorphosis comes from Orpheus's inherited abilities that trace their lineage back through Gith herself. Let me explain why that matters and how it connects to the divine conflict at the heart of this story. Vlaakith, the Lich Queen that Lae'zel worships, didn't just steal the githyanki throne through political maneuvering. According to the banned texts that a few githyanki rebels have managed to preserve, she built her entire empire on the imprisonment of Gith's son. And Gith herself, the legendary liberator, may have been betrayed and sent to her death in the Nine Hells by the first Vlaakith. The evidence suggests that what githyanki are taught as Gith's noble sacrifice was actually murder disguised as alliance. So here we have Shadowheart, a Sharan carrying an artifact stolen from githyanki forces, an artifact that protects its bearers using power derived from Selûne's bloodline. And here we have Lae'zel, a githyanki warrior seeking that same artifact, unaware that freeing its prisoner would expose the lies her entire civilization is built upon. Shar's servant protecting Selûne's descendant. Vlaakith's warrior seeking to recover the evidence of Vlaakith's greatest crime. The gods must find this absolutely hilarious. The Forgotten Realms is vast beyond mortal comprehension, filled with planes of existence that intersect and diverge like threads in an infinite cloth. But certain conflicts transcend even that vastness. The war between Shar and Selûne has raged since before written history, since the very moment when light and dark separated in the primordial void. The Githyanki war against the Aleithids has spanned uncounted worlds and consumed entire civilizations. These are not merely mortal struggles. They are the fundamental conflicts that define reality itself, battles between concepts given divine form, between hope and despair, between light and shadow, between freedom and enslavement. Shadowheart and Lae'zel represent more than themselves. They are avatars of these ancient wars, walking symbols of philosophies that cannot coexist except in eternal opposition. Their journey together, forced by circumstance and the mind flayer tadpole pulsing behind their eyes, will require them to confront not only each other, but the very foundations of their identities. What does it mean to serve a goddess who demands that you forget who you are? What does it mean to worship a queen who devours the souls of her greatest warriors? These are questions that will be answered in blood and starlight, in shadow and silver moonbeams. But the story is more intricate still, and this is where things get truly dark. The artifact that Shadowheart guards wasn't just stolen, it was stolen by people who had no idea what they were taking. The Sharans knew the githyanki valued the Astral Prism highly, knew it had something to do with combating mind flayers, but Shar's intelligence network apparently never discovered the prison's actual contents. They thought they were stealing a weapon. They were actually stealing a political prisoner whose very existence, if revealed, would shatter the foundations of githyanki society. Prince Orpheus isn't just Gith's son. According to the fragmented historical records that Orpheus's secret devotees have preserved, texts banned on pain of execution throughout githyanki space, he possessed his mother's rare ability to disrupt the illithid hive mind. This wasn't magic, but a psionic mutation, something in his neural structure that could interfere with elder brain control. The githyanki who still remember him describe this as their people's greatest hope against future enslavement. But Vlaakith saw it differently. She saw a threat. Someone with Orpheus's power and bloodline could unite the githyanki against her if they ever learned the truth about how she came to power. So she didn't kill him, which would have been the obvious solution. She imprisoned him in the Astral Prism, where she could exploit his power while ensuring he could never use it against her. The infernal chains that bind him inside the artifact apparently allow Vlaakith to tap into his ability to disrupt elder brains without giving him any freedom of action. It's elegant in a horrifying way, using the son of the liberator to maintain the rule of the usurper. Lae'zel seeks this artifact believing it's a weapon against the Geik threat. She's technically not wrong, but she has no idea that recovering it means recovering the living proof that everything she's been taught about Vlaakith's legitimacy is a lie. Shadowheart protects it, believing it's a holy relic of Shar, unaware that the power protecting her from the tadpole's transformation comes from Orpheus's imprisoned essence, the same Orpheus whose existence Vlaakith has spent a millennium trying to erase from history. The fate of githyanki civilization, the potential liberation of a people from a 1,000-year tyranny, and the balance of power between two warring goddesses. All of it depends on what happens to the being imprisoned within that glowing prism. And the two women carrying it through the wilderness of the Sword Coast have absolutely no idea. As these two women journey together, their personal stories will mirror the cosmic dramas that shaped them. Shadowheart will be forced to confront a past that has been surgically removed from her memory, to learn that she was not born in darkness but stolen into it, that the goddess she serves with such devotion is the enemy of everything her parents held sacred. Lae'zel will discover that her queen is a tyrant and liar, that the legends she learned in the creche are propaganda designed to obscure a betrayal so profound it has poisoned her entire civilization. Both will stand at precipices where they must choose between comfortable lies and agonizing truths. The beaches near the crash site are littered with debris, nautiloid technology mixed with broken crates and the bodies of those less fortunate in their escape. Tiefling refugees watch from a distance, uncertain whether these survivors are threats or potential allies. But our focus narrows to these two women, circling each other with the wariness of predators who have not yet decided if they are rivals or prey. Shadowheart's hand throbs with the mysterious wound that never heals, Shar's mark of control and reminder of devotion. Lae'zel's muscles coil with barely restrained violence, her training demanding that she establish dominance immediately. The tension between them is palpable, electric, dangerous. This is just the beginning. Before their journey ends, Shadowheart will stand in the Shadowfell itself, the domain of her goddess, with a spear in her hand, and the choice to become either a champion of darkness or to betray everything she has been taught to believe. Lae'zel will stand before the Emperor, a mind flayer offering freedom for Prince Orpheus, and must choose between her hatred of the Gaik and the liberation of her people from Vlaakith's tyranny. These moments are not separate. They are interwoven, threads in the same vast narrative that spans the planes and reaches back to the dawn of creation. To understand their story, we must understand the goddesses who shaped them, the rebellion that forged an empire, and the lies that sustained it. We must journey to the beginning of all things, to the moment when darkness and light first knew themselves as separate entities. We must walk the blood-soaked history of the githyanki, from their enslavement to their fractured freedom. We must descend into temples of shadow and ascend to cities built on the corpses of dead gods in the astral plane. Only then can we truly appreciate the impossible choices that await Shadowheart and Lae'zel, and understand why their collision on a beach near Baldur's gate matters more than two mortal lives should ever matter. So settle in. Let the gentle rhythm of this tale carry you through darkness and light, through astral cities and shadow-cursed lands, through memories stolen and truths revealed. This is the story of two women who became more than pawns in cosmic games, who seized their destinies from the gods and queens who claimed to own them. This is the story of how faith is tested, how empires crumble, and how even the oldest wars can be changed by those brave enough to question what they have always been told to believe. The nautiloid has crashed, the journey has begun, and nothing will ever be the same. Shadowheart, the daughter hidden in darkness in the forests outside Baldur's gate, in a time now lost to memory and the deliberate erasure of Shar's mirror of loss, a child was born to two devout Selûnites. Her name was Jenevelle Hallowleaf, and she would grow up knowing the dappled moonlight through the trees, the quiet hymns her parents sang to the Moon Maiden, and the gentle philosophy of hope that Selûne's faithful embrace. Her father, Arnel, and her mother, Emmeline, were not warriors or heroes. They were simple folk who had chosen to raise their daughter away from the city, in a small community where Selûne's worship could be practiced in peace and seclusion. The Hallowleaf family lived modestly but lovingly. Young Jenevelle learned the cycles of the moon, understood that Selûne watched over travelers and those lost in darkness, and grew up with the knowledge that light would always return after even the longest night. She played in the woods, helped her parents tend their small garden, and prepared for her own initiation into the mysteries of the Moon Maiden. Like all children of that community, she would soon face a rite of passage, a trial to prove her faith and her courage. The rite was simple in concept, but profound in meaning. When a child of the Selûnite community came of age, they were sent alone into the forest at dusk. They had to find their way home using only the moonlight to guide them, navigating by Selûne's silver glow and trusting in her protection. It was not dangerous. The families knew these woods well, and the path was never truly perilous. But it taught self-reliance, faith, and connection to the goddess who lit the night sky. For generations, children had completed this rite and returned home to celebration and acceptance as full members of the community. Jenevelle's night came when the moon was full and bright. Her parents embraced her, whispered encouragement, and sent her into the trees as twilight deepened into true night. She walked with confidence at first, following familiar paths, singing softly to herself the hymns she had learned. The moonlight painted everything in shades of silver and shadow, and she felt Selûne's presence as a comforting warmth in her chest. This should have been a beautiful memory, a cherished moment of transition from childhood to a deeper understanding of faith. But Shar had other plans. Viconia de Vere, a drow cleric who had long ago turned from the spider goddess Lolth to serve the Lady of Loss, had been watching the Selûnite community for months. Viconia was ancient by most standards, having lived through centuries of the Forgotten Realm's tumultuous history, and she had learned patience in her service to Shar. The goddess had given her a mission, one that would take years to complete, but would serve as a profound act of spite against Selûne herself. Shar wanted a champion, a dark justiciar who would be forged from the most unlikely material, a child born to Selûne's faithful and broken, reshaped and turned into an instrument of darkness. Viconia had established the Cloister of Somber Embrace in Baldur's Gate, a Sharan temple hidden beneath the city's streets, operating in secret as a front known as the House of Grief. From this base, she had sent out agents to watch the Selûnite communities in the region. When her spies reported the existence of young Jenevelle, blessed with innate magical talent and raised in the light of the moon, Viconia knew she had found Shar's chosen subject for transformation. The goddess herself confirmed it through dark visions and whispered commands. This child would be taken, broken, and reborn as Shadowheart. The night of Jenevelle's rite, Sharan agents moved through the forest like living shadows. They had prepared for months, studying the routes the child might take, ensuring they would be in position when she was most vulnerable and alone. Astral Hallowleaf, Jenevelle's father, had his own secrets. He was not merely a simple forester, but a lycanthrope, blessed or cursed depending on one's perspective, with the ability to transform into a wolf. The Selûnite community had accepted him despite this condition, understanding that not all who carried the wolf's curse were evil, and Selûne herself held no hatred for lycanthropes who kept their hearts pure. When Arnell learned of the Sharan plot through a captured spy near their village, he immediately understood the terrible danger his daughter faced. He transformed into his wolf form and raced through the darkened woods, following Jenevelle's scent, desperate to reach her before the Sharans did. His powerful lupine form crashed through undergrowth and leaped over fallen logs, driven by a father's terror and love. He found Jenevelle at the same moment the Sharans did, in a small clearing where moonlight broke through the canopy in shafts of silver radiance. The battle was brief and brutal. Arnell, even in wolf form, was outnumbered and overpowered by Viconia's disciplined agents. They had prepared specifically for the possibility of intervention, carrying weapons blessed by Shar to wound lycanthropes and spells to bind and contain them. Jenevelle screamed as dark-robed figures surrounded her father, as she watched him fight with feral desperation before being brought down by magic and blessed silver. Then hands grabbed her, a cloth was pressed over her mouth and nose, and darkness claimed her as the potion took effect. When she woke, young Jenevelle Hallowleaf was in the Cloister of Somber Embrace, deep beneath Baldur's gate, far from her forest home, and farther still from the moonlight she had always known. Viconia stood over her, ancient eyes gleaming with satisfaction and dark purpose. The transformation would begin immediately. There would be no mercy, no gentleness. Shar's will was absolute, and the creation of a dark justiciar from a child of Selûne would require methods that would break lesser souls completely. The first thing they did was lie to her. They told her that her parents had been killed defending her from wolves, that only the mercy of the Sharan agents had saved her from being devoured. They showed her the wounds her father had sustained in battle and claimed they came from an animal attack, not from resisting her kidnapping. Young Jenevelle, traumatized and isolated, had no reason to doubt these cruel strangers who offered her shelter and purpose in her grief. The seed of deception was planted deep, and from it would grow a forest of false memories. But Jenevelle resisted at first. She cried for her parents, called out to Selûne in desperate prayers, refused to eat or cooperate with her captors. Her spirit, though young, was strong, fed by genuine faith and the love that had nourished her childhood. Viconia recognized this strength and knew it would need to be not merely broken, but redirected, transformed into fuel for Shar's service. The Mirror of Loss became the primary tool of this transformation. The Mirror of Loss is one of Shar's most insidious artifacts, a device that does not merely suppress memories, but actively tears them from the mind and soul, leaving wounds that never fully heal. In the cloister, Viconia forced young Jenevelle to gaze into the mirror again and again, more frequently than any other acolyte in the temple's history. Each session stripped away pieces of her past. Her mother's face faded first, then her father's voice, then the hymns she had learned, then the feeling of safety and love she had known. With each memory removed, Viconia filled the void with Sharan doctrine, with teachings about loss and emptiness, with the philosophy that all light eventually fails and only darkness endures. The process took years, not months, but years of systematic psychological destruction and reconstruction. Jenevelle forgot her name, forgot her parents, forgot the moonlight that had once guided her. She became Shadowheart, a name chosen to mock her origins, the heart that had once yearned for light, now cloaked in darkness and shadow. The irony pleased Shar immensely. Here was a child of the Moon Maiden, now devoted to the Lady of Loss, a perfect symbol of darkness's eternal victory over light. But there was more cruelty still. Arnell and Emmeline Hallowleaf were not killed when Jenevelle was taken. They too were captured and brought to the cloister, imprisoned in a place called the Chamber of Loss. There they were held for decades, kept alive through magic and Sharan rituals, unable to escape and unable to die. Viconia's plan was more twisted than simple kidnapping. As Shadowheart grew within the cloister, as she became proficient in the arts of divine magic granted by Shar, as she learned to value secrecy and loss above all things, she was forced to practice her skills on prisoners. She did not know, could not have known, that among those prisoners were her own parents. The Mirror of Loss had been so thorough in its work that Shadowheart did not recognize Arnell or Emmeline even when she stood before them. She saw them only as subjects for interrogation, as bodies on which to perfect her techniques of extracting information and inflicting the suffering that Shar demanded. The psychological torture of this situation was exquisite from Shar's perspective. Here was a daughter torturing her own parents while believing herself loyal to the goddess who had orchestrated their suffering. The cosmic mockery was complete, yet some part of Shadowheart's original self never fully died. It could not. The core of who Jenevelle Hallowleaf had been, the gentle child who loved flowers and moonlight, remained buried beneath layers of Sharan conditioning. This manifested in small ways that Shadowheart herself did not understand. She had an inexplicable fondness for night orchids, despite knowing they were poisonous. She felt uncomfortable watching unnecessary cruelty, preferring efficiency over sadism, even when Sharan doctrine might have encouraged the latter. She questioned, in the quiet moments when no one could hear her thoughts, whether the emptiness Shar promised was truly the answer to suffering, or merely another form of it. Viconia noticed these small rebellions, these tiny cracks in the armor of indoctrination she had spent decades forging. The Mother Superior responded with the mysterious wound on Shadowheart's hand, a mark that would cause intense pain whenever she strayed too far from Shar's teachings or questioned the goddess's wisdom. It was both punishment and leash, a reminder that she belonged to the Lady of Loss completely. The wound never healed, never scarred, remained always fresh as the day it was inflicted. Shadowheart learned to associate doubt with agony and obedience with relief from pain. By the time Shadowheart reached her maturity, nearly half a century had passed in the conditioning, though she appeared to be only in her late 20s due to her half-elf heritage. She had become exactly what Viconia and Shar desired, a weapon forged from an innocence destroyed, a champion of darkness born from light. Her skills as a trickery domain cleric were exceptional. She could deceive and misdirect, could operate in shadows and secrecy, could embody all the virtues that Sharans held sacred. She was ready for her first true mission, the task that would prove her worth and earn her place among Shar's chosen. The mission was audacious to the point of seeming impossible. A group of Sharans would infiltrate a githyanki stronghold and steal an artifact of immense power, something called the Astral Prism. Intelligence suggested the githyanki possessed this object and that it contained power relevant to the growing threat of mind flayer activity in the region. Shar herself had commanded that it be retrieved and brought to the cloister in Baldur's Gate. The mission would be led by Kaldan Darkwood, and Shadowheart would serve as the team's healer and spiritual anchor. Before departing, Shadowheart underwent one final ritual with the Mirror of Loss. To protect the cloister's secrets and location, to ensure that torture or mind reading by enemies could not compromise the mission, she willingly allowed her memories to be suppressed even further. She would remember her mission, remember her loyalty to Shar, remember her skills and training. But the details of the cloister itself, the faces of her fellow initiates, even the specifics of what the Astral Prism truly contained, all of this would be hidden from her own mind. She would be a blind arrow, shot toward a target she could not fully see, trusting that Shar's guidance would be enough. The other members of the team were Budug Vris, Kirk Deepcroft, and Drina Coverley. They were experienced Sharans, veterans of dangerous operations, and they treated young Shadowheart with a mixture of respect for her abilities and wariness of the favor she seemed to enjoy from Mother Superior Viconia. Together, this small team ventured toward the Githyanki stronghold where the Astral Prism was kept, knowing they faced an enemy who had spent millennia perfecting the arts of war in the astral plane. The mission was, as the intelligence had suggested, indeed a suicide run. The Githyanki were not enemies to be taken lightly, and their security around such a powerful artifact was formidable. The Sharan team fought their way through Githyanki warriors mounted on red dragons, navigated defenses both magical and martial, and penetrated deeper into enemy territory than should have been possible. One by one, Shadowheart's companions fell. Budug was cut down by a Githyanki Gish, a warrior mage whose silver sword cleaved through her defenses. Kirk sacrificed himself to hold a corridor against pursuing warriors, buying time for the others to advance. Drina made it nearly to the prism itself before an ambush ended her life. Kaldan Darkwood and Shadowheart, the last survivors, finally reached the Astral Prism. Kaldan touched it first, and in that moment, something unexpected happened. The prism activated, responding to the desperation of these intruders, and a presence within it reached out psychically. The entity offered protection, offered to shield them from the githyanki pursuit, but there was a cost. Kaldan, brave Kaldan, who had led them so far, was consumed by the artifact's power as it fully activated. His sacrifice was not in vain. The prism's power surged around Shadowheart, cloaking her from the githyanki's detection, creating a psychic blind spot that let her slip away through the chaos of battle. Shadowheart escaped the githyanki stronghold alone, clutching the Astral Prism, traumatized by the loss of her entire team, but grimly satisfied that the mission had succeeded. She would bring the artifact to Baldur's gate. She would present it to Mother Superior Viconia. Shar would be pleased. The sacrifices would have meaning. These were the thoughts that sustained her as she fled through strange landscapes, making her way back toward the Sword Coast and the city that contained the only home she could remember. But fate, or perhaps the gods, had other plans. As Shadowheart traveled, a nautiloid ship appeared from nowhere, blotting out the sun with its grotesque bulk. Mind Flayers, the ancient enemy of the githyanki, had detected something about the prism or about Shadowheart herself. Tentacles whipped out and seized her, pulling her aboard the ill-fated vessel. She fought, but against the Mind Flayer's psychic might and physical strength, even a trained Sharan warrior was helpless. They dragged her to the Ceramorphosis chambers, those horrific laboratories where the illithids transformed, captured victims into new Mind Flayers through the implantation of tadpoles. The tadpole slipped into Shadowheart's eye, burrowing into her brain, beginning the process that would end with her transformation into a Mind Flayer. But something was wrong with this tadpole, or perhaps something was different about the illithids who implanted it. The process did not proceed as it should have. The tadpole remained dormant, not developing as quickly as it ought to, held in check by forces Shadowheart could not understand. Later, she would learn that the entity within the Astral Prism, the being that had helped her escape the githyanki, was also protecting her from full Ceramorphosis, blocking the transformation commands that should have turned her into a geik. Shadowheart was imprisoned in a pod on the nautiloid, one of many victims awaiting processing or transformation. The ship was not traveling normally through space, but was phasing between dimensions, moving in ways that defied conventional understanding. Then everything went chaotic. Githyanki warriors, riding their red dragon mounts, attacked the nautiloid in retaliation for illithid raids on their people. The ship shuddered under dragon fire and githyanki boarding parties. Systems failed, dimension warping drives malfunctioned, and the entire vessel began to tear itself apart as it plummeted toward the material plane. In the chaos, Shadowheart's pod was damaged. She regained consciousness to find herself trapped, able to see the destruction happening around her, but unable to free herself. This is where fate introduced her to the person who would change everything, though she did not know it yet. Another victim of the Mind Flayers, whether Tav, Dirge, or another of the game's potential protagonists, found her trapped. They could have left her. They could have saved themselves and run. But they chose to free her, using a console near her pod to release the mechanisms that held her captive. Shadowheart emerged, gasping and disoriented, clutching her artifact. The stranger who freed her wanted answers, wanted to know about the artifact and about her. But there was no time. The nautiloid was breaking apart, crashing toward the surface far below. They ran together through twisting corridors, fighting through intellect devourers and other horrors, barely staying ahead of the destruction consuming the ship. When they finally reached the helm, when the ground rushed up to meet them, Shadowheart clutched the Astral Prism and prayed to Shar for deliverance. She woke on the ravaged beach with sand in her mouth and the artifact still in her hands. The Nautiloid's wreckage smoldered in the distance. The person who had freed her was nearby, along with others who had escaped the crash. And somewhere in that debris field, angry and armed and looking for githyanki prey, was Lae'zel. The mission had gone so far off course that Shadowheart could barely recognize it anymore. But the artifact was safe. She was alive, and Shar's will would yet be done. She had no way of knowing that the artifact she guarded contained the key to freeing the githyanki from Vlaakith's tyranny, that the entity protecting her was a mind flayer with its own agenda, or that her entire faith would soon be tested in ways that would force her to confront the truth of who Jenevelle Hallowleaf had been before Shar took her. For now, she was simply Shadowheart, loyal servant of the Lady of Loss, determined to complete her mission despite the impossible odds arrayed against her. The journey to the Gauntlet of Shar and the choice that awaited her there was still far ahead. But with every step, with every conversation with her new companions, with every act of kindness or cruelty that she witnessed or participated in, the foundations of her faith would be tested. The wound on her hand would pulse with pain whenever she questioned Shar's wisdom. But questions, once asked, are difficult to silence. And in the deepest part of her soul, buried beneath decades of indoctrination and suffering, Jenevelle Hallowleaf was still screaming to be heard. Shar, the Lady of Loss and Eternal Night. To understand Shadowheart's devotion, to comprehend the depth of indoctrination that shaped her every thought, we must journey back to the very beginning of existence in the Forgotten Realms. We must travel to a time before time, to the primordial void that existed before creation, before gods, before mortals, before even the concept of light and dark had meaning. This is where Shar was born, or perhaps where she has always been. For her nature is so fundamental to reality that separating her from the void itself is like trying to separate darkness from the absence of light. In the beginning, there was only the crystal sphere of realm space, empty and filled with swirling, formless essence. This was not nothing, but it was not yet something. It was potential without form, possibility without actuality. From this primordial soup, from this cosmic womb of pure magical energy, two beings coalesced. They were twins, identical yet opposite, two halves of a whole that should never have been divided. They were Shar and Selûne, darkness and light, loss and discovery, emptiness and fullness. The sisters who were one came into being together, and for a time, perhaps, they existed in perfect balance. Shar embodied the void, the comfortable nothing that had existed before creation began its chaotic work. She was and is the living memory of that perfect emptiness, the nostalgia for non-existence that haunts every created thing. Her very essence is paradoxical. She was brought into being by creation, but represents the nothing that existed before creation. She is something that embodies nothing. She is the goddess of the void that should have remained void. This fundamental contradiction drives everything about Shar's nature and actions. She longs to return the universe to the state it was in before she existed, even though her existence proves that such a return is impossible. Selûne, her twin sister, embodied the opposite principle. Where Shar was the comfort of emptiness, Selûne was the excitement of possibility. Where Shar represented the end of all things, Selûne represented beginning and hope. The two sisters, despite their opposite natures, worked together at first. They were so close that they considered themselves one being, the two-faced goddess, yin and yang in perfect cosmic harmony. Together, they shaped the raw, magical essence of realm space, bringing order from chaos, creating the first forms and structures that would become the worlds. From their combined efforts came Chauntea, the embodiment of matter and life, the Mother Earth who would one day nurture countless civilizations. Chauntea was not born, but emerged from the sisters' shaping of primordial essence, a third divine entity called into being by the work of creation. With Chauntea came the first solid forms, worlds taking shape in the cosmic darkness, potentials becoming actualities. Shar's darkness embraced these new worlds like a welcoming shroud, while Selûne's light illuminated them so that their forms could be perceived and appreciated. For a time, this arrangement seemed sufficient. The darkness of Shar provided rest and peace, the gentle emptiness of sleep and endings. The light of Selûne provided guidance and hope, the possibility of growth and discovery. Chauntea's worlds hung between them, bathed in the cool radiance of Selûne's face and cloaked in the comforting darkness of Shar's embrace. The cycle seemed perfect, day and night, light and dark, being and non-being, all in balance. But Chauntea was cold. The light from Selûne, though beautiful, provided no warmth. Life struggled to fully manifest on the worlds that had been created, hindered by the chill that permeated everything. Chauntea cried out to her creators, asking for warmth, for fire, for the heat that would let life truly flourish. This request, simple and reasonable as it seemed, would shatter the perfect balance of the sisters who were one forever. Selûne heard Chauntea's plea and was moved by compassion. She understood that the worlds they had created deserved the chance to fully realize their potential, that life should be more than a struggling thing barely clinging to existence in the cold. She made a decision that would change everything. Reaching beyond the boundaries of the crystal sphere, reaching into a plane of pure, elemental fire, Selûne grasped a fragment of eternal flame. It burned her, seared her divine essence with agony beyond mortal comprehension, but she held on. She brought this flame back into realm space and ignited a heavenly body, creating the sun. Warmth flooded across Chauntea's worlds. Life exploded in response, diversifying and spreading, filling the newly warmed landscapes with abundance and variety. Chauntea sang with joy. Selûne, though wounded and weakened by her ordeal with the eternal flame, felt satisfaction at having answered the need of the worlds. The age of true life had begun, and it was glorious. Shar was enraged beyond any mortal capacity to understand. To Shar, Selûne's creation of the sun was not an act of compassion, but an act of violence against the natural order. The perfect darkness, the comfortable void that Shar embodied, had been violated. Light had been brought where no light should exist, endless and unyielding, burning away the shadows that Shar cherished. Worse still, Selûne had acted unilaterally, had made this decision without consulting her twin, had broken the unity of the sisters who were one with her independent action. The betrayal went beyond the tactical to the existential. Selûne, in creating the sun, had declared that something was better than nothing, that existence should triumph over void, that light was superior to dark. Shar launched herself at her sister with fury incarnate. The battle between the two goddesses shook the foundations of realm space itself. Shar sought to blot out the sun, to snuff out this obscene eternal flame, to return the worlds to the comfortable cold darkness where they belonged. Selûne, already weakened by her ordeal with the fire plane, struggled to defend both herself and the sun she had created. The combat between twin goddesses raged across dimensions, their divine essences clashing in ways that warped reality around them. Selûne was losing. Shar's strength was undiminished, fueled by righteous fury and the fundamental power of the void itself. The sun began to dim under Shar's assault. Darkness crept back across Chontea's worlds. Life, which had just begun to flourish, now faced extinction as the cold returned. Selûne, desperate and dying, made the only choice left to her. She reached into her own divine essence, into the core of what made her a goddess, and she tore out a piece of herself. This act nearly killed Selûne. To remove part of one's divine essence is an agony beyond agony, a mutilation that would cripple any god. But Selûne hurled this piece of herself at Shar with the last of her strength, and the fragment of divine essence struck her sister like a meteor of pure magical power. The impact tore through Shar, pulling loose some of her own essence, bonding with it as the two fragments merged and transformed. From this union of Selûne's sacrifice and Shar's stolen essence, a new goddess was born. Mistral, the original goddess of magic, came, screaming into existence from the collision of light and dark, born from violence and desperation, embodying the raw magical essence that underlies all reality. She was daughter to both sisters and neither, a synthesis of their opposed natures. Mistral looked upon the conflict that had birthed her, upon Selûne wounded nearly unto death, and Shar still raging with fury, and she called for peace. Using her newborn power over magic itself, Mistral forced a truce between the warring goddesses. Shar retreated into the darkness, but the damage had been done. The sisters who were one were now permanently divided. The perfect balance was broken forever. The sun continued to burn. Life continued to flourish, and Shar's perfect void had been irrevocably violated. From that moment forward, Shar's purpose crystallized into an eternal mission. She would undo creation itself, return the universe to the perfect nothing that had existed before, destroy all light and warmth and life until only the comfortable darkness remained. This is not metaphor. This is not exaggeration. Shar genuinely seeks the end of all existence, not because she is evil in some petty sense, but because she believes that non-existence is the only true peace, that the pain of existence outweighs any joy it might bring, that the greatest mercy she can offer to the universe is oblivion. She is a goddess of entropy and ending, of the heat, death of reality, of the final darkness that waits at the end of time. But Shar is also practical. She understands that her ultimate goal cannot be achieved through direct assault alone. The other gods oppose her. Mortals cling stubbornly to their meaningless existence, and even her own sister, despite being permanently weakened by the wound she took in their ancient battle, continues to fight against the darkness. So Shar has learned subtlety. She has learned to work through agents, to corrupt from within, to turn the weapons of light against itself. The Sharan faith reflects this approach. Shar's followers are taught that loss and pain are sacred, that every ending is holy, that secrets should be kept and memories should be abandoned. They practice in hidden temples, their worship conducted in shadows, because even acknowledging them diminishes their effectiveness. A Sharan who is known as a Sharan has already failed in some essential way, for secrecy is at the core of their doctrine. They move through society like a cancer, hidden and spreading, preparing the world for the darkness that will one day consume all. The Mirror of Loss is one of Shar's most effective tools for maintaining control over her followers. This artifact does not merely suppress memories, but actively removes them, creating gaps in the victim's sense of self that can then be filled with Sharan doctrine. Those who gaze into the mirror feel their past slipping away, their sense of identity eroding, until they are empty vessels waiting to be filled with Shar's will. The process is agonizing and permanent. Memories removed by the Mirror of Loss do not return naturally. They are simply gone, as if they had never been. leaving only scars where personality once existed. The Sharan doctrine teaches that this is mercy. They argue that pain comes from attachment, that loss is inevitable, that the only way to avoid suffering is to embrace emptiness before life can hurt you. They point to the dead, who feel no pain, and argue that they are at peace in a way the living can never be. They teach that Shar loves her faithful by preparing them for the ultimate truth, that nothing lasts, nothing matters, and the only honest response to existence is to welcome its ending. This philosophy has a terrible appeal for those who have experienced great loss or betrayal. When life has inflicted unbearable pain, when love has been taken and hope has been crushed, the promise of emptiness can seem like salvation. Shar offers to remove the hurt by removing the capacity to hurt, to end suffering by ending the self. For those in profound despair, this is not a threat but a promise. The Lady of Loss will take away everything, and in that taking, she will take away the pain as well. Sharans practice a ritual called the Nightfall Feast, also known as the Nightfall Ceremony. In this sacred rite, the faithful gather for a banquet, enjoying food and drink in apparent celebration. Then, at the height of the feast, they select an innocent victim, someone who has done nothing to deserve death, and they kill them as an offering to Shar. This is not merely cruelty for its own sake, but a theological statement. The innocent suffer most in creation, the ritual argues, because they have the most to lose. By killing the innocent, by taking everything from those who least deserve such loss, the Sharans demonstrate the fundamental injustice of existence and hasten the day when all existence will end. Dark Justiciars represent the pinnacle of Sharan achievement, warrior priests who have proven their devotion through trials of loss and shadow. They are Shar's Templars, her holy knights, granted powers that let them move through darkness like liquid shadow and strike down the followers of rival deities with devastating effectiveness. To become a Dark Justiciar, a Sharan must pass through the gauntlet of Shar, endure its trials, and make the ultimate sacrifice by killing a child of Selûne in the Shadowfell itself. The Shadowfell is Shar's domain, a dark reflection of the material plane, where shadows are thick enough to touch and hope is a foreign concept. It exists in parallel to the normal world, accessible through certain portals and rituals, and within it, Shar's power is nearly absolute. Those who venture into the Shadowfell without protection find their emotions drained away, their colors fading to gray, their will to live eroding until they become shadows themselves, mindless echoes of who they once were. Sharans thrive in this environment, drawing power from the oppressive darkness, becoming more than human through their goddess's blessing. Shar also created the Shadow Weave as a direct challenge to Mystra, the successor to Mistral. The Shadow Weave is an alternative source of magical power, running parallel to the normal weave that underlies all magic in the Forgotten Realms. Spells cast through the Shadow Weave are tainted with negative energy, with loss and darkness, and they function differently from normal magic in ways that can surprise those unfamiliar with them. Shar offered the Shadow Weave to mortal spellcasters as an alternative to Mistra's Weave, seeking to corrupt magic itself at its source, to turn even the tools of creation against the continued existence of the world. During the Spell Plague, a catastrophic event in Faerûn's history, both the Weave and the Shadow Weave were destroyed. Shar lost this tool of corruption, but she has never abandoned her goal. She continues to seek new ways to undermine Mystra and her successors, continues to spread darkness and loss, continues to prepare for the day when the last light finally fails and the universe returns to the peaceful emptiness she cherishes above all things. Throughout history, Shar's influence has been felt in countless tragedies and betrayals. She delights in turning hope to despair, in corrupting idealists, in taking what people hold most dear and destroying it before their eyes. She is the goddess of nursing grudges and planning cold revenge, of secrets kept and lies told, of relationships poisoned by mistrust, and communities destroyed by hidden sins. She works through her faithful, grants them power sufficient to spread her doctrine of loss, and rewards them by eventually taking everything from them as well, because in Shar's philosophy, her most devoted followers deserve the mercy of complete annihilation. This is the goddess that Shadowheart serves with every fiber of her being, the deity whose doctrine has been burned into her soul through decades of conditioning. When Shadowheart experiences pain, she has been taught to embrace it as Shar's love. When she loses something precious, she has been trained to thank the Lady of Loss for the opportunity to practice detachment. When she doubts, the wound on her hand flares with agony, reminding her that questioning Shar's wisdom is itself a form of suffering that must be overcome through faith. Understanding Shar is essential to understanding why Shadowheart's eventual choice in the Shadowfell is so monumental. It is not merely rejecting a religion or choosing a different deity. It is turning away from a philosophy that has been woven into every aspect of her identity, defying a goddess who has the power to inflict unimaginable suffering on those who betray her, and choosing hope in a context where hope has been systematically trained out of her. When Shadowheart stands with the Spear of Night in her hands, facing the Night Song and the command to kill, she is standing between two absolute principles: Shar's doctrine of inevitable loss and Selûne's promise of enduring light. But we must also understand Selûne, the Moon Maiden, if we are to appreciate the full scope of the conflict that Shadowheart embodies. We must journey into light as we have journeyed into darkness, must understand the goddess of the moon as deeply as we understand the goddess of night. Only then will we truly comprehend what is at stake when these ancient enemies meet on the field of a single mortal soul. Selûne, the Moon Maiden's radiant defiance. Where Shar is the void, Selûne is the light that reveals what hides within it. Where Shar promises peace through ending, Selûne offers hope through persistence. These are not merely different philosophies, but fundamentally opposed ways of existing in the cosmos. Selûne is Shar's twin sister, identical in power though not in purpose, and their eternal conflict defines much of the moral geography of the Forgotten Realms. To understand Shadowheart's journey from darkness to light, or at least from darkness to the choice of light, we must understand the goddess whose followers raised her before Shar's agents stole her away. Selûne came into being alongside Shar in the primordial void, born from the same cosmic womb of swirling magical essence. But where Shar immediately longed for the comfortable nothing that had preceded creation, Selûne looked forward with curiosity and hope. She embodied the potential of the void to become something more, the possibility that existence might have value, that the pain of being might be justified by moments of beauty and connection. From the beginning, though the sisters who were one worked together, their fundamental natures were in tension. When Selûne reached into the plane of elemental fire and brought back the eternal flame to create the sun, she acted from compassion rather than malice. She saw Chontea's newly formed worlds struggling in the cold, saw life trying to emerge, but unable to flourish without warmth, and she made a choice to sacrifice her own divine essence to give those nascent beings a chance to thrive. The fact that this decision also permanently broke her relationship with her twin sister, that it initiated an eternal war between light and darkness, was perhaps foreseeable, but not the primary motivation. Selûne acted because suffering moved her, because she believed that existence, despite its pain, was worth protecting and nurturing. The wound Selûne took in that ancient battle, the portion of her divine essence that she tore out and hurled at Shar, has never fully healed. Unlike other gods who can regenerate from injuries given sufficient time, Selûne's self-inflicted wound was so profound that it permanently weakened her. Her power waxes and wanes like the phases of the moon itself, sometimes strong enough to challenge her sister directly, sometimes barely able to maintain her presence in the world. This fluctuation is not mere metaphor, but a fundamental aspect of her divine nature. The moon, Selûne's physical form in the night sky, goes through phases because the goddess herself goes through phases. Times of strength and times of weakness. Cycles of power that have defined her relationship with the mortal world for millennia. Despite this permanent disadvantage, despite being perpetually weakened by the sacrifice that created the sun, Selûne has never surrendered to Shar's vision of universal ending. She continues to fight, continues to offer hope to mortals, continues to argue through her very existence that being is better than non-being, that light matters even when surrounded by darkness, that the struggle to survive has inherent meaning. This persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable opposition defines everything about Selûne and her worship. Selûne's portfolio as a goddess encompasses the moon and stars, navigation and journeys, wanderers and seekers, those who are lost and need guidance. She is invoked by sailors who use the stars to chart their course, by travelers who walk roads at night and need the moon to light their way, by those who feel lost in their own lives and pray for direction. Her light is not the harsh brilliance of the sun, which reveals everything without mercy, but the gentle silver glow of moonlight, which illuminates enough to find your path while leaving some mysteries intact. Selûne is chaotic good in alignment, reflecting her belief that freedom and compassion are more important than order or law. She does not demand rigid adherence to doctrine or punish those who question her wisdom. Her faithful are encouraged to find their own paths, to make their own choices, to seek truth rather than accepting comfortable lies. This makes Selûnite communities very different from Sharan temples. Where Sharans operate in secret and enforce strict discipline through pain and conditioning, Selûnites worship openly and encourage individual spiritual journeys, even when those journeys lead away from formal religious practice. The Selûnite clergy tends toward diversity and acceptance. Good-aligned lycanthropes, those cursed with beast forms, but who maintain their moral center, often find sanctuary in Selûne's temples. Mystics and fortune-tellers, healers and midwives, all these can be found among Selûne's followers. Female spellcasters, particularly those who practice divination magic, have a special connection to the Moon Maiden. The goddess values those who help others find their way, whether through physical guidance on dangerous roads or spiritual counsel in times of crisis. One of Selûne's most important roles is as protector of those lost in darkness. This is both literal and metaphorical. She watches over travelers on night roads, ensures that those journeying through dangerous lands can see well enough to avoid hazards, and offers hope to those who feel spiritually or emotionally lost. A prayer to Selûne is often a prayer for hope, for the strength to continue when giving up seems easier, for light to pierce whatever darkness has enveloped the supplicant's life. In this way, she is the direct antithesis of Shar, who offers peace through surrender, while Selûne offers hope through perseverance. The eternal war between Selûne and Shar has raged for so long that most mortals cannot comprehend its scope. It began before recorded history, before the first mortal civilizations, before even the earliest dragons and giants claimed dominion over the world. This conflict has consumed worlds, destroyed civilizations caught in the crossfire, and shaped the fundamental nature of good and evil in the Forgotten Realms. Countless Sharans and Selûnites have died in this war, each side believing absolutely in the righteousness of their cause, each side convinced that the other represents an existential threat to everything meaningful. The war is fought on multiple levels simultaneously. In the heavens, Shar seeks to blot out the stars and moon, to darken the night sky and remove Selûne's most visible symbol of hope. Selûne struggles to keep her light burning, to maintain her presence in the heavens as a reminder that darkness is not absolute. On the material plane, Sharan cultists work to undermine Selûnite communities, spreading loss and despair, assassinating prominent worshippers of the Moon Maiden, destroying temples dedicated to her worship. Selûnite knights and crusaders, sometimes called the Swords of the Lady or lunatics by those who view their devotion as excessive, hunt Sharan agents and seek to root out her hidden temples. In the Shadowfell, Shar's power is nearly absolute, and Selûne's faithful who venture there often do not return. But Selûne has her own domains, places where moonlight is strong and shadows hold no power, and into these sanctuaries Sharans cannot easily penetrate. The war is eternal stalemate, neither side able to achieve final victory, both sides convinced that ultimate triumph is just one more sacrifice away. This divine conflict filtered down to young Jenevelle Hallowleaf before she became Shadowheart. Her parents, Arnel and Emmeline, were devotees of Selûne, who had chosen to raise their daughter in the old ways, away from cities and their complications, in a forest community where the moon could be properly appreciated and worshipped. They taught her that Selûne watched over her, that the Moon Maiden's light would guide her through any darkness, that hope was not foolish but necessary, the fuel that kept one moving forward even when the path ahead seemed impossible. The rite of passage that young Jenevelle was undertaking when she was kidnapped, the walk through the forest guided only by moonlight, was specifically designed to instill trust in Selûne's guidance. It taught that even when alone, even when afraid, the faithful could rely on their goddess to show them the way home. The light would always be there. The moon would not abandon them, and patience combined with trust would eventually lead to safety and love. This was the philosophy that Viconia and her Sharan agents destroyed when they took Jenevelle and began her transformation into Shadowheart. Shar specifically commanded that Shadowheart be forged from a child of Selûnites because the cruelty was the point. To take a girl raised in moonlight and transform her into a champion of darkness, to make her forget her own parents and torture them without recognition, to turn Selûne's potential servant into Shar's devoted weapon. This was the ultimate expression of Shar's victory over her sister. Every moment that Shadowheart served the Lady of Loss was a moment of triumph in the eternal war, proof that even those raised in light could be claimed by darkness, that Selûne's promises of hope were ultimately empty. But Selûne did not abandon Jenevelle Hallowleaf, even when she became Shadowheart, and forgot the Moon Maiden's name. The goddess could not intervene directly, for divine rules and cosmic balance prevent gods from simply rewriting mortal free will. But Selûne waited. She preserved the memories that the Mirror of Loss had taken, held them in trust like precious jewels, knowing that one day, perhaps, Shadowheart might choose to reclaim what had been stolen. The small rebellions in Shadowheart's nature, the fondness for flowers, the discomfort with unnecessary cruelty, the questions that persisted despite Shar's pain-enforced conditioning, these were all subtle signs that Jenevelle's soul had not been completely destroyed. Selûnites believe that light always returns after darkness, that dawn follows night as certainly as spring follows winter, that hope is not naive, but realistic because the cycles of existence favor life over death, being over void. They point to the moon itself, which wanes to a sliver but always waxes full again, which disappears entirely during the new moon but returns brighter than before. This cyclical nature of Selûne's power is not weakness, but strength. They argue, because it proves that even when overcome, even when reduced to almost nothing, light persists and returns. The Selûnite doctrine does not deny suffering or pretend that loss is not real. Selûne herself was wounded nearly unto death in the ancient battle with Shar, gave up a portion of her divine essence and has never recovered it, knows intimately the pain of permanent loss. But Selûnites argue that suffering does not negate meaning, that loss does not erase the value of what was lost, that pain is real, but so is joy, and choosing to live, choosing to hope, choosing to persist despite suffering, this is the courageous path, rather than the cowardly surrender that Shar offers. When Shadowheart eventually stands in the Shadowfell with the Spear of Night in her hands, facing the choice to kill or spare the Night Song, Selûne cannot make that choice for her. The goddess cannot reach into the quaint Shadowfell, cannot override Shar's power in her own domain, cannot simply whisk Shadowheart away to safety. But Selûne is present in that moment nonetheless, in the memories that have been preserved, in the truth that Dame Aelin speaks, in the flicker of doubt that Shadowheart feels as she grips the spear. The Moon Maiden's influence is subtle where Shar's is overwhelming, gentle where Shar is brutal, offering rather than demanding. This is the fundamental difference between the twin goddesses. Shar claims her followers through pain and conditioning, through the removal of choice until only obedience remains. Selûne invites her followers through hope and freedom, through the preservation of choice even when the wrong choice would be easier. Shar promises peace through ending. Selûne promises meaning through persistence. One offers death, the other life. One demands surrender, the other inspires struggle. And in Shadowheart, these two forces meet, two goddesses waging their eternal war on the battlefield of a single soul. But our story is not only about Shadowheart and her divine patrons. We must now turn our attention to Lae'zel, to understand the Githyanki warrior whose journey parallels Shadowheart's in unexpected ways, whose crisis of faith mirrors that of the Sharan cleric, despite coming from a completely different cultural and religious context. To understand Lae'zel, we must understand the Githyanki people, must trace their history from slavery to freedom, from united rebellion to fractured factions, from hope to tyranny. We must journey to the astral plane, to cities built on dead gods, to see what Vlaakith has made of the empire that Gith died to create. Lae'zel, warrior of the astral blade. In the astral plane, where time does not flow as it does in the material plane, where thought becomes visible and willpower shapes reality, there exists a place called Kresh Kalir. It is built on Stardock, one of the celestial bodies known as the Tears of Selûne, asteroid-sized chunks of matter that orbit the moon goddess's domain. Here, in this place where Githyanki eggs are brought to hatch and where Githyanki young are trained in the arts of war, Lae'zel was born into a culture that had spent millennia perfecting the art of violence. Her first memories, if Githyanki children form memories so early, would have been of discipline and pain. Githyanki training begins essentially from birth, a relentless program designed to produce warriors capable of fighting mind flayers, perhaps the most dangerous psychic predators in all the multiverse. There is no gentleness in a Githyanki Kresh, no room for weakness, no tolerance for those who cannot meet the brutal standards that have been set. From her earliest days, Lae'zel would have learned that might makes right, that the strong survive and the weak are culled, that her people's war against the Gaik justifies any sacrifice and any brutality. The Githyanki language itself is called Tirsu, a unique form of writing where words are formed in circles rather than lines, with letters linked in clockwise rings from the top. Sentences become series of these rings, a visual representation of githyanki philosophy that emphasizes cycles of violence and eternal war. Learning to read and write in Tirsu is part of githyanki education, along with the combat training that consumes most of their young lives. By the time a githyanki reaches adolescence, they can kill with bare hands, can wield the silver sword that is their people's signature weapon, can channel innate psionic powers that let them leap vast distances and shield their minds from psychic assault. Lae'zel excelled in this environment. She was not merely competent, but exceptional. Her reflexes sharper, her discipline stricter, her devotion to Vlaakith more absolute than her peers. She internalized every lesson, accepted every hardship, pushed herself beyond the already extreme standards of githyanki training. She was, in the parlance of her people, a blade being honed to perfect sharpness, a weapon being forged in the harshest fires to ensure it would never break in battle. Her instructors noted her potential, marked her as one who might one day achieve great honors in Vlaakith's service. The indoctrination Lae'zel received was total and absolute. She learned that Vlaakith Clevinth, the Lich Queen, was the rightful ruler of all githyanki, chosen by Gith herself before the legendary liberator disappeared into the Nine Hells. She learned that obedience to Vlaakith was not merely wise, but sacred, that questioning the Queen's commands was heresy punishable by death or worse. She was taught that the githyanki are the superior race, that all other peoples are either istic, inferior beings whose existence is beneath contempt, or geik, the mind-flayer abominations who must be hunted to extinction. Young Lae'zel heard the legends of Mother Gith, the warrior who led the slaves in their rebellion against the Illithids, whose name became the name of the race she liberated. She learned how Gith united the scattered slave rebellions, how her mutation, a strange psionic gift that disrupted the Elder Brain's control, allowed her people to fight back against their creators. She was told how Gith led her people to the astral plane after the civil war with Zerthimon's followers, how she made the pact with Tiamat that gave the githyanki their red dragon mounts, how she sacrificed herself to ensure her people's future. But there were things young Lae'zel was not told. She did not learn that Vlaakith the Third had betrayed Gith, sending her to certain death in the Nine Hells rather than the glorious alliance she expected. She did not hear about Prince Orpheus, Gith's son and rightful heir, whose very existence was erased from official histories. She knew nothing of the War of the Comet, the rebellion that Orpheus had led against Vlaakith's usurpation, or how it had ended with his imprisonment rather than his death. These truths were kept from her and from all githyanki, maintained as state secrets by the Lich Queen and her most trusted agents. The central focus of Lae'zel's training, beyond mere combat skills, was preparation for the rite of passage that would mark her transition from youth to adult warrior. Every githyanki must undergo this trial to be accepted as a full member of society. The task is simple to state, but dangerous to accomplish. Kill a mind flayer and bring its severed head to Vlaakith as proof. This is not metaphorical. This is not a symbolic gesture. A githyanki coming of age must travel to the material plane or another location where Illithids can be found, must track down one of these psychically powerful predators, must defeat it in combat through whatever means necessary, and must personally sever the creature's head to present before the Lich Queen. Lae'zel dreamed of this moment constantly. She imagined the honor, the recognition, the feeling of kneeling before Vlaakith herself and presenting the Gaik's head as proof of her worth. She trained with an intensity that impressed even her harsh instructors, practicing forms until her muscles screamed, studying Illithid anatomy to learn their weak points, meditating to strengthen her mind against psychic assault. She wanted to be perfect, wanted her first kill to be flawless, wanted to prove herself worthy of the legends she had been raised to revere. But Lae'zel's coming-of-age trial was interrupted in the most horrific way possible. Before she could complete her rite, before she could hunt down a mind flayer and claim her place among adult githyanki warriors, she was captured by the very creatures she had been training to kill. A mind flayer raiding party struck the location where Lae'zel was being held, overwhelming the defenses, seizing prisoners for their ceremorphosis chambers. Lae'zel fought with desperate fury, killed several thralls and wounded an illithid before being overwhelmed by psychic assault and physical restraint. Being captured by mind flayers is the ultimate nightmare for any githyanki. These are the creatures who enslaved their people for uncounted generations, who still view the gith as wayward property to be reclaimed, who can turn a proud warrior into a mindless thrall, or worse, into another mind flayer through the implantation of a tadpole. For Lae'zel, the shame of capture was almost worse than the physical danger. She had failed. She had been taken by Gaik. Her failure was absolute and humiliating. The mind flayers dragged her aboard a nautiloid, one of their organic ships that travel between planes. They put her in a ceremorphosis chamber and inserted a tadpole through her eye, beginning the process that would end with her transformation into an illithid. Lae'zel was conscious through the insertion, felt the tadpole burrowing into her brain, knew with absolute certainty that she was going to be turned into the very thing she had been, trained to destroy. The horror of this fate is difficult to overstate. For a githyanki warrior, becoming a Gaik is worse than death, worse than torture, worse than any suffering that maintains one's identity. It is the ultimate violation, the complete destruction of self. But something was wrong with the tadpoles on this particular nautiloid, or something was different about the ceremorphosis process. The transformation did not proceed as it should have. The tadpole remained dormant, not developing through its usual stages, held in check by some unknown force. Lae'zel did not know, could not have known, that an entity imprisoned within an artifact the mind flayers had also captured was using its own psionic powers to block the transformation, to keep the tadpoles from turning their hosts into illithids. Then the nautiloid was attacked by githyanki warriors riding red dragons, her own people coming to exact vengeance on the Gaik who dared to raid githyanki space. The ship's systems failed under the assault. It began to plummet toward the material plane, dimensions tearing around it, everything spiraling into chaos. Lae'zel was still conscious in her chamber when the crash came, when the ship slammed into the ground near the river Kionthar and broke apart. She escaped the wreckage and immediately began scanning for weapons and resources. A group of tiefling refugees, survivors of the fall of Elturel during the descent into Avernus event that had occurred recently, found her before she could properly orient herself. They did not know what a githyanki was, only that this strange, frog-like woman appeared dangerous and alien, and was near the crashed ship that had caused such destruction. They captured her using nets and numbers, overpowering her while she was still disoriented from the crash, and hung her in a cage from a stone arch near their encampment. This is where the player character finds her during the opening hours of Baldur's Gate 3, hanging in a cage while two tieflings debate what to do with her. Lae'zel is furious beyond words. She has been captured twice in short succession, first by Gaik and now by Istik, inferior beings who should not be capable of containing a githyanki warrior. Her pride is wounded. Her honor is stained. And she has a tadpole in her brain that will eventually turn her into a Gaik if she cannot find a way to have it removed. When the player character releases her or persuades the tieflings to let her go, Lae'zel immediately asserts dominance through aggression and dismissive language. She calls the player character Istik, makes it clear that she considers them inferior, and offers what she frames as a generous bargain. She knows where githyanki creatures are located on the material plane, and these creatures have devices called Zythisk that can purge mind flayer tadpoles without killing the host. If the player character helps her find a creche, she will allow them to use the Zythisk as well. This is presented not as cooperation between equals, but as a master permitting a useful servant to benefit from her generosity. Lae'zel's entire worldview is shaped by githyanki culture, which is itself shaped by centuries of war against the Mind Flayers and decades of authoritarian rule under Vlaakith. She sees the world in terms of strength and weakness, usefulness and worthlessness, geik and not geik. Cooperation is acceptable if it serves githyanki interests. Mercy is acceptable only when it costs nothing. Questions about orders or doctrine are signs of weakness that must be ruthlessly suppressed. She has been raised to believe these things as absolutely as Shadowheart has been raised to believe in Shar's doctrine of loss. But Lae'zel is not merely a brute or a simple warrior. She is capable of tactical thinking, of adjusting her approach when circumstances require it, of forming something that might, in a different culture, be called friendships. She respects competence and despises weakness, but her definition of these things can shift based on experience. When she sees the player character fight effectively, survive situations that should be fatal, demonstrate the kind of strength that githyanki culture values, her respect grows, despite her initial dismissiveness. She begins to see them not as mere istik, but as warriors worthy of acknowledgement, perhaps even as something approaching equals. The journey that Lae'zel undertakes alongside Shadowheart and the other companions is going to test every assumption she has ever held. She will encounter Kithrak Voss, a githyanki commander, who will tell her things that contradict everything she has been taught. She will learn about Prince Orpheus and the lies that Vlaakith has told to maintain power. She will stand before the Lich Queen herself and witness betrayal so profound it will shake her faith to its foundations. And she will have to choose, ultimately, between comfortable lies that support her worldview and agonizing truths that require her to rebuild her entire understanding of who she is and what she serves. But to understand why these revelations are so devastating, to comprehend the scale of betrayal that Lae'zel will eventually face, we must first understand the history of the githyanki people. We must trace their journey from slavery to freedom, from unity to fracture, from rebellion to empire. We must understand what the Mind Flayers did to create the Gith, how Gith freed her people from bondage, and how Vlaakith corrupted that freedom into a different form of tyranny. Only then can we appreciate why Lae'zel's world will shatter when she learns the truth about the queen she has served with such devotion. The Githyanki legacy, from slaves to star warriors. Long before Lae'zel was born, before Creche Kalir existed, before the Githyanki had claimed the astral plane as their home, there was the Illithid Empire. This empire spanned multiple worlds and planes, a vast civilization built on psionic domination and the enslavement of countless intelligent races. The Mind Flayers, creatures of pure intellect and alien cruelty, saw other beings not as fellow persons, but as resources to be exploited, bodies to be used, minds to be consumed. Their empire was absolute, their power seemingly unstoppable, and among their many slave races were the people who would one day be called Gith. The original Gith, the people before their liberation and renaming, are shrouded in historical mystery. Some scholars believe they were humans or human-derived, while others argue they were always their own distinct species. What is known with certainty is that they spent generations, perhaps centuries or millennia, as slaves to the Illithid Empire. They were bred for certain traits, their genetics shaped by Illithid selection to produce workers and warriors suited to specific tasks. They built the Mind Flayers' cities, fought their wars, served in every capacity that the Illithids deemed necessary. Life as a Gith slave was designed to be hopeless. The Mind Flayers maintained control through a combination of physical force and psychic domination. The Elder Brains, massive psychic entities created from the brains of dead illithids, could reach into the minds of every thrall in their domain, suppressing rebellion before it could manifest, reading thoughts to detect dissent, crushing hope before it could spread. Individual illithids could dominate minds directly, turning slaves into extensions of their own will, puppets dancing on psychic strings. Resistance seemed impossible because resistance could not even be contemplated without the Elder Brains detecting and destroying it. But something changed. The details are lost to history, buried under millennia of conflicting accounts and deliberate obfuscation. But at some point, a Gith was born with an unusual neural structure, a psionic mutation that would change everything. This individual could sense the Elder Brain's psychic presence and actively disrupt it, creating blind spots in the hive mind's omniscient surveillance. She could shield other Gith from mental control long enough for them to remember that they were people, not property. Her name was Gith. Whether this mutation occurred spontaneously or was the result of the Mind Flayers' own genetic manipulation programs backfiring in spectacular fashion, we can only speculate. What matters is that it gave the Gith slaves something they had never possessed before: hope. And from hope came rebellion. Gith's ability apparently ran in her bloodline. Her son, Orpheus, the same Orpheus now imprisoned in the Astral Prism that Shadowheart carries, is described in the few surviving texts about him as possessing the same gift. This suggests the trait is hereditary, though whether it's genetic or represents some form of psychic inheritance is a question that githyanki scholars would probably love to study if Vlaakith hadn't made even speaking Orpheus's name a capital offense. The ability to disrupt illithid hive minds is what makes the bloodline of Gith uniquely dangerous to the Mind Flayer Empire, and uniquely threatening to anyone who rules the githyanki through deception. The rebellion began small, scattered uprisings in different parts of the illithid empire, slave revolts that the Mind Flayers initially dismissed as minor disturbances to be suppressed. But Gith was organizing, moving through the slave populations like a whisper of hope, teaching other Gith how to resist, showing them that the Elder Brains were not all-seeing, that freedom was possible if they were willing to fight for it. Each successful uprising freed more slaves, and more importantly, freed their minds from the psychological conditioning that had kept them docile for so long. As the rebellion grew, Gith revealed herself not just as a liberator, but as a military genius. She understood that the Gith could not simply flee their former masters, but had to actively destroy the illithid empire's ability to recapture them. She organized the freed slaves into armies, taught them to fight not as individuals, but as coordinated units, and led them in campaigns that struck at the heart of illithid power. The Mind Flayers had never faced a threat like this, an enemy who could resist their mental domination and who understood their weaknesses. The war that followed was brutal and spanned multiple worlds. The illithid empire, which had seemed eternal and unshakable, began to crumble under the sustained assault of their former slaves. World after world was liberated, illithid cities burned, Elder Brains were destroyed in acts of vengeance that were both strategic and cathartic. The Gith proved to be formidable warriors when given the chance to fight rather than serve, their hatred of their former masters fueling tactics of such ruthless efficiency that even the Mind Flayers began to fear them. But victory came with a terrible cost. Countless Gith died in the rebellion, sacrificed in battles that were necessary but devastating. Entire generations were consumed by the war. Those who survived were shaped by trauma, by the memory of bondage, by the knowledge of what the illithids had done to their people. This trauma would define githyanki culture for millennia to come, would shape their philosophy and politics in ways that would echo down to Lae'zel's time and beyond. When the immediate threat of the Illithid Empire was broken, when the Gith had claimed their freedom through blood and steel and psionic warfare, they faced a new question. What next? They were free, but freedom is not the same as purpose. They had won the war, but peace required decisions about how to build a civilization, how to organize their society, how to prevent the Illithids from ever enslaving them again. This is where the first great fracture appeared. Gith, the legendary liberator, believed that the war was not over. She argued that the Mind Flayers must be hunted to extinction, that every Illithid colony in every plane must be destroyed, that the Gith could never truly be safe until every Elder Brain was dead and every Mind Flayer was nothing but ash. Her vision was of eternal war, of a civilization built around the sole purpose of vengeance and prevention, every Gith dedicating their life to ensuring that what had been done to them would never be done to anyone else. But Gith was not unopposed. Among her most trusted advisors was a warrior named Zerthimon, who offered a different vision. Zerthimon argued that the Gith had earned rest, that constant war would simply replace one form of slavery with another, that pursuing vengeance across the plains would consume generation after generation in endless conflict. He believed the Gith should find a place to settle, to build a peaceful civilization, to focus on healing from their trauma rather than perpetuating it. The disagreement between Gith and Zerthimon was not about tactics, but about fundamental philosophy. Was freedom defined by the absence of chains, or by the ability to choose peace? The debate between these two legendary figures split the Gith people in a way that would never heal. Zerthimon made his position clear in what became known as the Pronouncement of Two Skies, a declaration that there cannot be two leaders, that the people must choose one vision or the other. Some sources say that the two leaders fought personally, that Gith killed Zerthimon in single combat, while others claim the battle was between their followers, with the leaders surviving to lead the two factions. Either way, the result was the same. Civil war erupted among the people who had just won their freedom from the Illithids. Those who followed Gith became the githyanki, meaning followers of Gith, or Gith's people. Those who followed Zerthimon became the Githzerai, meaning those who spurn Gith. The civil war was vicious, former comrades turning on each other, the unity that had defeated the Mind Flayers shattered by ideological differences. The Githzerai, unable to defeat Gith's forces in open battle, retreated to the plane of Limbo, a realm of raw chaos where their monasteries and fortresses could be defended. The Githyanki, with Gith still leading them, claimed the astral plane as their new home. The astral plane is a strange realm where time does not pass, where thought becomes visible, where gods themselves can be found in various forms. For a people traumatized by centuries of slavery, it offered several advantages. First, Githyanki who remain in the astral plane do not age, making them effectively immortal as long as they stay there. Second, the plane's nature makes it difficult for Mind Flayers to operate effectively, as their psychic powers function differently in a realm where thought is physical. Third, it placed the Githyanki beyond the easy reach of their enemies, in a dimension that required significant power and knowledge to access. But the astral plane presented its own challenges. Githyanki eggs could not hatch there, and Githyanki children could not mature into adults without the passage of time. This meant that the Githyanki had to establish creches on other planes, places where eggs could be incubated, and young Githyanki could grow to adulthood before returning to the astral plane. These creches became military outposts as well as nurseries, fortified locations in the material plane and elsewhere that served as anchors for Githyanki civilization. Gith herself began to seek allies for the eternal war she envisioned. She knew that even freed and organized, The githyanki alone might not be enough to hunt illithids across every plane of existence. She needed powerful beings to support her cause, armies that could match her own in strength and ferocity. This search for allies led Gith to consult with Vlaakith, a githyanki wizard of exceptional power and ambition. Vlaakith the Furrer, as she would later be known, advised Gith to seek an alliance with Tiamat, the dragon goddess, queen of chromatic dragons. On the surface, this seemed like sound strategy. Tiamat commanded vast flights of red dragons, whose power and aggression would complement githyanki tactics perfectly. If such an alliance could be forged, the githyanki would become unstoppable, able to rain destruction on illithid colonies from Dragonback. Gith traveled to the Nine Hells to negotiate with Tiamat personally, taking with her a small honor guard of her most trusted warriors. And here's where the official story starts to fall apart if you look closely enough. The githyanki are taught that Gith willingly became Tiamat's hostage to ensure the alliance, that she sacrificed her freedom so her people could have their dragon mounts. It's portrayed as the ultimate act of selfless leadership, the liberator giving up everything to secure her people's future. But here's what doesn't make sense about that narrative. Why would Gith, who spent her entire life fighting against enslavement, voluntarily enter into another form of bondage? Why would the woman who taught her people that freedom was worth any price surrender her own freedom so casually? The banned texts that Orpheus's devotees have preserved tell a different story. They suggest that Vlaakith knew exactly what would happen when she sent Gith to the Nine Hells, that the alliance was actually a sacrifice, that Tiamat took Gith not as an honored hostage, but as payment, consumed, destroyed, or enslaved in ways that ensured she would never return to challenge Vlaakith's claim to power. According to these accounts, Vlaakith deliberately orchestrated the murder of the legendary liberator and then used the Dragon Alliance as proof of her own legitimacy. Whether this darker version is true, we may never know with absolute certainty. What we do know is this: Gith never returned. Vlaakith claimed the throne. And when Gith's son Orpheus questioned the circumstances of his mother's disappearance and started asking uncomfortable questions about Vlaakith's rise to power, he was branded a traitor, and the War of the Comet began. Ephelemon, Tiamat's red dragon consort, appeared before the githyanki, with Gith's supposed final decree naming Vlaakith as queen. He brought an ancient scepter as proof of Tiamat's acceptance of the bargain. The githyanki, grieving their lost leader and desperate for structure, accepted Vlaakith's claim. And with that acceptance, the greatest lie in githyanki history became official truth. Gith's son, Orpheus, inherited more than just his mother's psionic abilities. He inherited her sense of justice and her unwillingness to accept obvious lies. He questioned the circumstances of his mother's journey to the Nine Hells. He wondered why a woman who preached freedom above all else would voluntarily become a prisoner. He looked at Vlaakith's rapid consolidation of power and saw not legitimate succession, but opportunistic usurpation. Orpheus gathered his mother's honor guard, those warriors who had been most loyal to Gith personally, and made his accusation public. Vlaakith had betrayed Gith. The Dragon Alliance was paid for with murder. The queen claiming to rule in Gith's name had actually engineered Gith's death. Orpheus declared himself the rightful heir and called for Vlaakith to be removed from power. What followed became known as the War of the Comet. Orpheus and his honor guard, mounted on red dragons, fought Vlaakith's forces in battles that lit up the astral plane. Dragon against dragon. Psionic warrior against psionic warrior. The conflict should have torn githyanki civilization apart. And here's where githyanki children in every creche learn the same story. Orpheus was defeated by the loyal commander Kithrak Voss. The prince's body was devoured by Ephelemon, Tiamat's own consort. as punishment for his rebellion. Orpheus is taught as a cautionary tale, a jealous pretender whose grief twisted into ambition, someone who tried to seize power illegitimately and paid the ultimate price. But that's not what actually happened. Orpheus wasn't killed. He was captured and imprisoned in the Astral Prism, bound with infernal chains specifically designed to contain his psionic abilities. Vlaakith couldn't kill him because she needed him. His power to disrupt elder brain control was too valuable to simply destroy. So she did something arguably worse than murder. She turned Gith's son into a tool, exploiting his inherited abilities, while keeping him locked away where he could never use them to challenge her rule. His honor guard was imprisoned with him. These warriors, loyal to the end, refused to abandon their prince, even when it meant sharing his eternal captivity. They're still there, suspended in time within the Astral Prism, waiting for freedom that has not come for over 1,000 years. For centuries, Orpheus's very existence has been erased from githyanki history. His name is forbidden. Anyone who speaks it is branded a traitor and executed. Only Vlaakith and her most trusted agents, including Kithrak Voss, the man who officially killed him but actually helped imprison him, know that Orpheus still lives. This is the artifact that Shadowheart carries, stolen by Sharans who had no idea what they were taking. This is what Lae'zel seeks, believing it to be a weapon. The prison of the rightful heir, the living proof that every githyanki serves a dynasty built on lies. The line of Vlaakiths continued through the centuries, each queen taking the name to emphasize continuity with the first. They claimed to be descendants of Gith herself, to carry her blood and her mandate to rule, though the truth of these genealogical claims is suspect at best. Each Vlaakith ruled until death, then was succeeded by the next, maintaining the fiction that this dynasty represented Gith's will rather than the usurpation of it. Vlaakith Clúvant, the current ruler in Lae'zel's time, represents the culmination of this system's corruption. Unlike her predecessors, who at least maintained the pretense of mortality, Vlaakith Clúvant transformed herself into a lich, an undead creature sustained by dark magic and the consumption of souls. She has ruled for over 1,000 years, growing increasingly paranoid and power-mad with each passing century, jealously guarding her throne against any who might challenge it. Vlaakith Clúvant developed a horrifying practice to maintain her power. Whenever a githyanki warrior becomes too skilled, whenever someone demonstrates abilities that might threaten her rule or attract followers who could support a rebellion, she summons that warrior to her presence in the city of Túnarath. She praises them, honors them, and then she devours their soul, consuming their strength to add to her own. The githyanki people are taught that this is an honor, that being chosen by Vlaakith for this ascension represents the highest achievement possible. Those who question this practice are eliminated before their doubts can spread. This is the civilization that Lae'zel serves with such devotion. This is the queen she has been raised to worship. She knows nothing of Orpheus, nothing of Vlaakith's betrayal of Gith, nothing of the soul-eating that sustains Vlaakith Clúvant's undead existence. She has been taught that githyanki are superior, that Vlaakith is righteous, that obedience is sacred, and that the war against the mind flayers justifies any sacrifice. Her entire worldview, her sense of self and purpose, is built on foundations that are lies from top to bottom. When Lae'zel's journey brings her to Cresh Yerlek in Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3, when she stands before Vlaakith's projection and hears the Queen command her to enter the Astral Prism and kill whatever is inside, she has no reason to doubt. When Vlaakith then betrays her, calling for her death when obedience proves inconvenient, Lae'zel's world begins to crack. And when Kithrak Voss appears later to tell her about Orpheus, to explain that everything she has been taught is propaganda designed to support a tyrant. The cracks become chasms. Lae'zel's crisis of faith will parallel Shadowheart's in profound ways. Both women were raised in systems designed to control them completely. Both were taught to value obedience over truth, faith over doubt, loyalty over questions. Both will face moments where they must choose between comfortable lies and agonizing truths. Both will discover that the authorities they trusted have betrayed them in the most fundamental ways possible. And both will have to rebuild their identities from the ground up, deciding who they are when the foundations they thought were solid turn out to be illusions. But before we can explore those parallel journeys fully, we must examine one more piece of the cosmic puzzle that binds Shadowheart and Lae'zel together. We must understand the Astral Prism itself, the artifact that Shadowheart guards and that Lae'zel seeks, the prison that contains Orpheus and the key to freeing the githyanki from Vlaakith's tyranny. And we must trace the journey that brings both women to the Gauntlet of Shar, where Shadowheart will face her defining choice and where the first seeds of Lae'zel's doubt will take root. Vlaakith's tyranny and Orpheus's truth. The city of Tu'narath, capital of the Githyanki Empire, is built on a corpse, the body of a dead god, a being known only as the One in the Void, floats in the astral plane, and on its massive remains, the Githyanki have constructed their greatest metropolis. This is fitting in its way, for Githyanki civilization itself is built on corpses and lies, on the murder of Gith's dream and the imprisonment of her son. Tu'narath gleams with martial splendor, its streets filled with warriors and its skies patrolled by knights riding red dragons. But at its heart sits Castle Susurrus, where Vlaakith Clúthant maintains her throne through fear and soul consumption. Vlaakith Clúthant is ancient beyond most mortal comprehension, having ruled for more than 1,000 years since transforming herself into a lich. Her body is preserved through necromantic magic, her soul bound to a phylactery hidden somewhere in the astral plane, making her effectively immortal as long as that phylactery remains intact. But immortality has not brought her wisdom or peace. Instead, each passing century has deepened her paranoia, amplified her cruelty, and intensified her desire for absolute control over every aspect of Githyanki existence. The Queen wears a crown of corruption, an artifact of terrible power that enhances her already formidable magical abilities. She carries the scepter of Ephelemon, the symbol of Tiamat's bargain with Gith, using it as proof of her legitimate authority, even though that very bargain may have been the means of Gith's murder. Her castle is filled with magic items of legendary potency, accumulated through centuries of conquest and confiscation, each one adding to her ability to dominate and destroy any who might oppose her will. But Vlaakith's true power lies not in her magical artifacts or her undead immortality. It lies in her control of information, in the lies she has told so consistently and for so long that they have become accepted history. Every Githyanki child is taught that Vlaakith speaks with Gith's own authority, that the queens of the Vlaakith line are descendants of the legendary liberator, that obedience to the Lich Queen is the same as loyalty to the ideals of freedom that Gith embodied. These lies are reinforced through education, through culture, through the architecture of Githyanki society itself. Orpheus's existence is the truth that could shatter Vlaakith's power completely. He is Gith's actual son, her legitimate heir both by blood and by inheritance of her unique psionic abilities. If the Githyanki people learned that he lived, that he had been imprisoned for centuries while Vlaakith claimed his mother's throne through treachery, the entire political structure of Githyanki civilization would collapse. Warriors who believed themselves loyal to Gith's legacy would realize they had been serving her betrayer. The Lich Queen's authority, built on the fiction of legitimate succession, would be revealed as the usurpation it has always been. This is why Vlaakith keeps Orpheus's imprisonment absolutely secret. Only a handful of individuals know the truth. Vlaakith herself, a select few of her predecessors, who passed the knowledge down, and Kithrak Voss, the very warrior who officially killed Orpheus in battle, but who actually helped imprison him and has lived with that guilt ever since. There are also scattered devotees of Orpheus, githyanki, who have discovered fragments of the truth through research or intuition, who keep his name alive in secret and work toward his eventual liberation. But these devotees are few, carefully hidden, and constantly at risk of discovery and execution. The Astral Prism that contains Orpheus is an artifact of immense power, one that the githyanki have guarded jealously for centuries. It is not merely a prison, but a tool, designed to exploit Orpheus's ability to disrupt elder brain control without giving him the freedom to use that ability for his own purposes. When mind flayers attempt to use their hive mind control, when elder brains reach out psychically to dominate thralls, Orpheus's power automatically responds even from within his prison, disrupting the control and creating psychic blind spots. This makes the Astral Prism incredibly valuable in any conflict with Illithids, a weapon that can protect entire armies from psychic domination. But the prism has another occupant, one that Vlaakith did not anticipate and cannot control. A mind flayer who calls itself the Emperor has taken refuge within the Astral Prism, using the artifact's properties and Orpheus's imprisoned power to shield itself from the elder brain it once served. The Emperor is rogue, free from hive mind control, pursuing its own agenda independent of Illithid goals. It manifests to those protected by the prism as the Dream Guardian, or Dream Visitor, taking different forms to different viewers, appearing as someone the viewer trusts or finds attractive, using psychological manipulation to maintain its position as protector and advisor. When Shadowheart's Sharan team infiltrated the Githyanki stronghold and stole the Astral Prism, they did not understand what they were taking. The Sharans knew only that the Githyanki valued this artifact highly, that it contained some power relevant to combating Mind Flayer activity, and that Shar herself had commanded its retrieval. They did not know about Orpheus, did not understand the political significance of the prism, did not realize that they had seized the key to a potential revolution that could reshape Githyanki civilization. The Emperor, sensing an opportunity to escape Githyanki control entirely, facilitated Shadowheart's theft of the prism. It used its own psychic abilities to create confusion and openings to ensure that at least one Sharan would survive to carry the artifact away from the stronghold. When Shadowheart was later captured by different mind flayers and implanted with a tadpole, the Emperor protected her from full ceremorphosis, recognizing that keeping her alive and functional would serve its own interests better than allowing her transformation into a typical mind flayer. This brings us to the situation at the beginning of Baldur's Gate 3, with Shadowheart carrying an artifact she does not understand, protected by a mind flayer she does not know exists, while Lae'zel seeks the same artifact, believing it to be a weapon that could help remove her tadpole. Neither woman understands the true stakes. They are pawns in games being played by gods, queens, and rogue Illithids, games that span centuries and could determine the fate of entire civilizations. Kithrak Voss represents the wild card in Vlaakith's carefully controlled narrative. He is a githyanki of exceptional skill and long service, a commander who has led countless raids against Illithid colonies, who has proven his loyalty through decades of effective violence in Vlaakith's name. But Voss carries a terrible secret. He was one of those who actually imprisoned Orpheus, who helped forge the chains that bind the rightful heir, who is known for his entire career that he serves a usurper who built her power on lies and betrayal. Voss's guilt has been growing for decades. He has watched Vlaakith consume the souls of exceptional Githyanki warriors, has seen the Lich Queen's paranoia drive her to increasingly cruel excesses, has come to believe that the Githyanki people deserve better than a 1,000-year-old undead tyrant who views her own warriors as threats to be eliminated. He has made contact with the secret devotees of Orpheus, with those who keep the prince's memory alive despite the danger of doing so, and he has begun to plan for the day when Orpheus might be freed and the truth finally revealed. When Voss learns that the Astral Prism has been stolen from githyanki control, he recognizes this as a potential turning point. The prison that has held Orpheus for centuries is now in the hands of Sharan cultists who do not understand what they possess. If he can recover it, if he can find a way to break the infernal chains that bind Orpheus, if he can free the prince and unite the Githyanki people under Gith's true heir, then perhaps the centuries of tyranny can finally end. But this requires careful planning, precise timing, and most difficult of all, convincing Githyanki warriors raised on Vlaakith's propaganda that everything they have been taught is a lie. This is the situation that will lead Voss to seek out Lae'zel specifically. He recognizes in her someone who embodies the best of what Githyanki should be, skilled and fierce and devoted to the ideals of freedom that Gith represented. But he also sees that she has been thoroughly indoctrinated in Vlaakith's lies, that her faith in the Lich Queen is absolute, that confronting her with the truth will be difficult and potentially dangerous. Nevertheless, Voss believes that Lae'zel can be turned, that her fundamental decency and commitment to what she believes are Githyanki values will eventually lead her to reject Vlaakith when she understands the depths of the Queen's corruption. The inscribed discs that Voss and other devotees have preserved tell the true story of Orpheus and the War of the Comet. These discs are banned by Vlaakith, possession of them punishable by immediate execution, but they continue to circulate in secret among those who question the official narrative. Some are hidden in Githyanki creches, concealed where soldiers might accidentally discover them if they look carefully enough. Others are secreted in libraries and archives, protected by those brave enough to preserve truth at the risk of their own lives. These discs speak of Orpheus's bravery, of his righteousness in questioning Vlaakith's rise to power, of the honor guard who followed him out of loyalty to Gith's memory. They record his accusation that Vlaakith sacrificed Gith to Tiamat, that the bargain for Red Dragon mounts was really a murder disguised as alliance. They praise his mother and condemn the betrayer who claimed her throne. Most importantly, they reveal that Orpheus did not die in battle, but was captured and imprisoned, that he lives still in magical bondage, that he could be freed if someone were brave enough to challenge Vlaakith's power directly. Vlaakith knows these discs exist and has spent tremendous resources trying to destroy every copy. She has executed countless Githyanki suspected of possessing or reading them. She has sent agents throughout Githyanki space to root out the devotees of Orpheus and eliminate them before their knowledge can spread. But she cannot destroy the truth completely, cannot erase her original sin, no matter how many warriors she kills or how many records she burns. The truth persists, hidden but unbroken, waiting for the moment when it can finally emerge into light. This is the web of deception that Lae'zel will eventually unravel. Her journey from absolute faith in Vlaakith to potential alliance with Orpheus is not a simple matter of learning new information. It requires her to question everything she has ever believed, to accept that her entire civilization is built on lies, to recognize that the queen she worships is a tyrant who devours the souls of the warriors she claims to lead. This is psychological devastation on a scale difficult for those not raised in such a system to fully comprehend. But all of this is still ahead of both Shadowheart and Lae'zel as they begin their journey together on the ravaged beach. They do not yet know how their fates are intertwined, do not understand that the Astral Prism connects their stories in ways that reach back to the dawn of creation and forward to the potential liberation of an entire people. They know only that they have tadpoles in their brains, that they need to survive, and that they do not particularly like or trust each other. The journey to understanding, to truth, to the choices that will define their lives is just beginning. And it will lead them both to the gauntlet of Shar, where darkness and light will collide in ways that neither of them can anticipate. The journey to the gauntlet of Shar. The path from the ravaged beach to the shadow-cursed lands is long and filled with revelations that chip away at the certainties both Shadowheart and Lae'zel carry like armor. In Act 1, as they navigate the wilderness around the Emerald Grove, investigate the goblin camp, and search for cures to their tadpole infection, small moments of friction and understanding begin to define their relationship. They argue constantly, their worldviews clashing with the predictable force of opposing philosophies meeting in confined space. Shadowheart experiences the mysterious wound on her hand flaring with pain at unexpected moments. When she shows kindness to animals, the pain recedes. When she passes Selûnite symbols or encounters anything that touches on her forgotten past, the agony intensifies until she can barely function. She does not understand why these things trigger such responses, only that Shar must be testing her, that she must endure and prove her devotion through suffering. The artifact remains clutched in her possession, and she guards it obsessively, knowing that delivering it to the cloister in Baldur's Gate is her sacred duty, even if she cannot remember exactly why it is so important. Lae'zel drives the party toward finding a githyanki creche with single-minded intensity. She is contemptuous of delays, dismissive of side quests that do not directly serve the goal of tadpole removal, and constantly frustrated by what she sees as the softness and inefficiency of Istik culture. When they encounter the tiefling Zoru, who has seen githyanki warriors on the road near the mountain pass, Lae'zel's interrogation is brutal and effective. She learns that a githyanki patrol was seen near a bridge, that they rode red dragons and struck fear into all who witnessed them. This news fills her with hope and pride, belief that her people are near, and that salvation from the tadpole infection is within reach. The journey to Creche Yelek takes them through the mountain pass and eventually to Rosimorn Monastery, where the githyanki have established a military outpost. Along the way, they encounter Kithrak Voss for the first time, though the meeting is brief and tense. Voss rides his red dragon mount and commands a small patrol of githyanki warriors. When he sees Lae'zel, there is recognition not of her specifically, but of what she represents. A young warrior still faithful to the propaganda, still believing the lies, still capable of being saved from the system that has shaped her. If the player navigates the conversation carefully, Voss and his patrol depart without violence, directing Lae'zel and her companions toward the creche where they can seek the cure they desire. But Voss's eyes linger on the group, and particularly on the artifact that Shadowheart carries. He knows what it is, knows who it contains, and knows that its presence here, so far from githyanki control, represents both danger and opportunity. He will remember this encounter, will use it as the foundation for what he plans to do later. At Creche Yelek, Lae'zel finally reunites with her people, or so she believes. The githyanki there are suspicious of her companions, particularly the Istik who travel with her, but they accept her as one of their own. She is directed to the infirmary where the Zythisk awaits, the machine that supposedly can purge Mind Flayer tadpoles without killing the host. For the first time since the Nautiloid crashed, Lae'zel feels hope that is not tinged with desperation. She is among warriors who understand strength, who value the things she values, who speak her language and know her gods. But the Zythisk is not what it seems. When Lae'zel or the player character uses it, the machine begins to tear at their mind with excruciating pain. It is not removing the tadpole, but damaging the brain tissue around it, a process that would eventually kill the subject or leave them mentally destroyed. The githyanki running the device seem unconcerned by this. suggesting that some damage is acceptable if the Gaik infection is removed. Only through successful ability checks can the subject be removed from the machine before permanent harm is done, and even then, the experience is traumatizing. This is Lae'zel's first hint that something is wrong with her people, that the systems she trusted might not be designed to protect her. The doubt is small at first, easily rationalized as incompetence or malfunction rather than deliberate cruelty. But it plants a seed that will grow as other revelations accumulate. The deeper the party ventures into Kresh Yelek, the more they discover evidence that does not align with official githyanki doctrine. They find the inscribed discs, banned texts that speak of Prince Orpheus and his rebellion against Vlaakith. If they read these carefully, they learn about the War of the Comet, about accusations of betrayal, about a truth that contradicts everything Lae'zel has been taught. She can dismiss these as heretical lies at first, propaganda from traitors seeking to undermine Vlaakith's righteous rule. But the discs are well hidden, preserved with care, suggesting that someone within the Kresh itself believes they are important enough to risk death to maintain. Eventually, the party reaches the inner chambers where Vlaakith's projection awaits. The Lich Queen manifests as a massive, imposing figure, her presence psychically overwhelming. She addresses the party with cold authority, and when she learns they possess the Astral Prism, her interest intensifies immediately. She commands them to enter the artifact and kill whatever they find inside, promising great rewards for obedience and terrible punishment for refusal. Lae'zel sees this as a test, an opportunity to prove her loyalty and worth before the Queen herself. She urges the party to obey without question, cannot comprehend why anyone would hesitate when Vlaakith has given a direct command. Her faith is absolute in this moment, her conviction unshakable. She believes that obeying will lead to honor, to the removal of their tadpoles, to everything she has been promised by the system that raised her. The party enters the Astral Prism, finds themselves in a strange pocket dimension, where the Dream Guardian finally reveals itself in its true form as the Emperor, a mind flayer. The Emperor explains that it is protecting the party from the Absolute's control, that killing it would leave them vulnerable to becoming mindless thralls, that Vlaakith wants it dead, not to help them, but to seize control of Prince Orpheus for herself. The party must choose whether to trust a mind flayer's words over a githyanki queen's commands. If they refuse to kill the Emperor, if they survive the encounter and return to face Vlaakith, the Lich Queen's response is immediate and absolute. She casts Wish, the most powerful magic in existence, attempting to simply erase the party from reality for their disobedience. Only through the Emperor's intervention do they survive, protected by the prism's power as Vlaakith's spell fails. The Queen's projection vanishes, but her fury echoes across the psychic void. The party has made an enemy of the Githyanki Empire, and Vlaakith will not rest until they are destroyed. This is the moment when Lae'zel's world-view shatters. She has obeyed every rule, followed every teaching, maintained absolute loyalty to her queen, and Vlaakith responded by trying to murder her. The rationalization is impossible to maintain. This was not a test. This was not some elaborate trial to prove her worth. Vlaakith genuinely wanted her dead because she had become inconvenient, because she asked questions, because she failed to kill the Emperor when commanded. The Queen Lae'zel worshipped, the figure she has organized her entire life around serving, views her as disposable, as a tool to be discarded when no longer useful. The Githyanki of Kresh Yelek turn hostile, following Vlaakith's command to eliminate the party. Warriors Lae'zel might have called comrades moments before now seek her death with the same efficiency and ruthlessness that Githyanki culture cultivates. There is no mercy, no attempt to understand what happened, no room for explanation. Lae'zel and her companions must fight their way out, killing githyanki, who were following the same doctrine of obedience that Lae'zel herself embodied minutes earlier. As they escape the creche and make their way back toward the shadow-cursed lands, Lae'zel is forced to process what has happened. Everything she believed about Vlaakith, about githyanki honor, about the righteousness of absolute obedience has been proven false in the most brutal way possible. She was raised to believe that strength would be rewarded, that competence would bring honor, that serving the queen with total devotion would lead to glory. Instead, she was nearly executed for the crime of asking questions and surviving the answer. This is when Kithrak Voss returns, appearing at the party's camp during a long rest. He brings with him truths that Lae'zel is finally ready, if not willing, to hear. Voss speaks of Orpheus, of Gith's true heir imprisoned for centuries while usurpers claimed his mother's throne. He explains the War of the Comet, the lies that have sustained Vlaakith's rule, the soul-eating that keeps the Lich Queen alive while consuming the greatest warriors of their people. He offers an alternative to blind obedience, rebellion, truth, and the possibility of freeing Orpheus to lead the githyanki people as Gith intended. For Lae'zel, this is not a simple matter of accepting new information. Her entire sense of self is bound up in being githyanki, in serving Vlaakith, in following the doctrines she was raised with from birth. To accept Voss's words is to accept that her entire life has been built on lies, that the heroes she admired were dupes or collaborators, that the honor she sought was never real. It is psychological devastation, the destruction of identity itself. But the alternative is to deny what she experienced in Creche Yelek, to pretend that Vlaakith's attempt to murder her was justified or misunderstood, to make herself complicit in her own oppression. Neither option offers comfort. Meanwhile, Shadowheart's journey toward the Gauntlet of Shar continues with growing intensity. As the party moves through the shadow-cursed lands toward Moonrise Towers, Shadowheart feels a pull she cannot explain, a sense that something waits for her in the darkness ahead. Her wound throbs constantly now, the pain both agonizing and familiar. She has lived with this pain for so long that part of her would feel incomplete without it, as if the suffering has become integral to who she is. The shadow-cursed lands whisper secrets to those willing to listen. Here's something particularly cruel that Shadowheart doesn't yet understand. She's walking through the aftermath of her own goddess's victory, through lands consumed by Shar's power, and she should feel triumphant. But instead, she feels haunted. The shadows that kill wanderers indiscriminately remind her of something she can't quite remember, some childhood fear buried beneath the mirror of loss's work. When she passes the remnants of Selûnite shrines, destroyed long ago by dark justiciars, her hand screams with pain, but there's also something else beneath the agony. Recognition. Grief. The ghost of emotions that should have been erased, but somehow linger. She doesn't know yet that some of these destroyed shrines might have been tended by people who knew her parents. That families like hers, Selûnite faithful living quietly in forest communities, were targeted specifically by Ketheric Thorm's dark justiciars during the curse's creation. That young Jenevelle's disappearance 50 years ago was part of a much larger pattern of Sharan cruelty directed against peaceful worshippers of the Moon Maiden. The Shadow Curse itself is, in a twisted way, a monument to the kind of devotion Shar demands. Devotion so absolute it destroys everything beautiful in pursuit of loss and emptiness. Lae'zel can accept this truth now because Vlaakith has already betrayed her. The foundation of her faith was absolute loyalty rewarded with honor and protection. That foundation crumbled when Vlaakith tried to kill her for disobedience. Voss's words, which would have seemed like heresy before Creche Yelek, now sound like explanation for what she has experienced. The discomfort remains. the cognitive dissonance of rejecting everything she was raised to believe. But the alternative is accepting that her entire life has been devoted to serving a monster who would murder her without hesitation. Meanwhile, Shadowheart's journey has been running parallel to Lae'zel's, though shaped by different forces. In Act 2, as the party travels through the shadow-cursed lands toward Moonrise Towers, Shadowheart feels drawn toward something she cannot fully name. The curse that blankets this region is caused by Shar's influence, a manifestation of the goddess's power that has turned a once verdant area into a nightmare landscape where light fails and hope dies. For a Sharan, this should be sacred, proof of the goddess's majesty. But Shadowheart feels unease alongside her awe, discomfort with the suffering the curse inflicts on innocents who had nothing to do with divine conflicts. She learns that the shadow curse is connected to Ketheric Thorm, a former Selûnite who turned to Shar after his daughter's death, who built a temple to the Lady of Loss beneath his family's mausoleum. This information triggers something in Shadowheart, memories she cannot quite reach, associations between Selûne and feelings of warmth that she cannot explain. Her wound flares whenever these thoughts surface, Shar's punishment for doubts that Shadowheart cannot fully suppress. The journey to the Gauntlet of Shar begins at the Grand Mausoleum, where the party encounters Raphael, a devil who offers cryptic warnings and impossible bargains. He speaks of the Gauntlet as a trial, as a place where Shadowheart will face her destiny, where choices made will echo across eternity. Shadowheart dismisses his dramatics, focused only on her mission: complete the trials, prove her devotion to Shar, become a dark justiciar if the Lady of Loss deems her worthy, and advance the goddess's cause against the hated Selûne. Entering the Grand Mausoleum requires solving a puzzle involving the paintings in Ketheric Thorm's audience chamber. The correct sequence reflects Ketheric's own journey from grief to darkness, from Moonrise Towers to the portrait of grief to the image of the general himself. When the mechanism activates, a hidden passage opens, revealing stairs that descend deep into the earth, into chambers where Shar's presence is absolute and overwhelming. The Gauntlet of Shar itself is an ancient temple, far older than Ketheric's recent occupation, a place where Sharans have come for centuries to prove their devotion through trials of loss and shadow. The main chamber features a massive statue of Shar, surrounded by purple braziers that must be extinguished to proceed. The braziers float in the air, controlled by levers in side rooms, and the floor between them is trapped with magical sensors that will throw back anyone who steps on them, while light remains. The puzzle requires patience and darkness, embracing the shadows that Shar represents, moving only when all light has been snuffed out. Beyond this initial chamber lie 4 trials, each designed to test a different aspect of Sharan devotion. The soft step trial requires stealth and the acceptance that some sacrifices must be made in silence. The self-same trial forces the party to confront dark reflections of themselves, shadow versions that know all their weaknesses and exploit them ruthlessly. The Faith Leap trial demands trust in Shar's guidance, even when all evidence suggests that such trust will lead to death. And the Yurga trial involves confronting a devil bound by contract, a being whose suffering serves Shar's purposes, but who yearns desperately for release. As Shadowheart progresses through these trials, the wound on her hand pulses with increasing intensity. The pain is constant now, a reminder of Shar's presence and expectations. But there are also moments of doubt, brief flashes when Shadowheart questions whether the suffering she has endured, whether the emptiness at her core, is truly what the goddess desires, or merely what Viconia has told her to desire. She dismisses these thoughts as quickly as they arise, afraid that Shar is testing her, that failure to maintain absolute faith will result in punishment worse than the hand wound's agony. The party eventually reaches the inner sanctum where Balthazar, the necromancer who serves Ketheric Thorm, has been conducting experiments with the Night Song. Balthazar is ancient and cruel, a being who has given himself over to death magic completely. He guards the portal to the Shadowfell where the Night Song is imprisoned, and he intends to transport it to Ketheric to maintain the general's immortality. The party must defeat him or convince him to let them pass, and either choice leads to the same destination, the Shadowfell itself, Shar's own domain. Entering the Shadowfell is like descending into tangible darkness. The sky, if it can be called that, is perpetually twilit, the air thick with oppressive shadow that seems to drain emotion and hope from all who breathe it. The architecture is strange, twisted, as if reality itself has been warped by Shar's presence. This is not the material plane reflected darkly, but something else entirely. A realm where the goddess's philosophy of loss and ending has become geographical truth. The party descends through the Shadowfell on platforms that rise and fall, jumping between floating islands of stone that hang in the void. The path leads ever downward, toward a cage that can be seen in the distance, toward a light that should not exist in this place of absolute darkness. That light is Dame Aelin, the Night Song, daughter of Selûne and champion of the moon, imprisoned by Shar and used by Ketheric as a battery for his necromantic immortality. This is where all the threads begin to converge, where Shadowheart's journey toward becoming a dark justiciar and Lae'zel's journey away from Vlaakith's lies will meet and intertwine. What happens in this cage, what choice Shadowheart makes when she stands before the Night Song with the Spear of Night in her hands, will determine not only her own fate, but will ripple out to affect Lae'zel's path, Ketheric's power, the balance between Shar and Selûne, and ultimately the fate of Baldur's Gate itself. The journey has led them here, to the moment of choice, to the point where everything changes or everything remains the same. In this place of ultimate darkness, where Shar's power is absolute and her will is law, Shadowheart must decide who she is and what she truly believes. And Lae'zel, witnessing this moment, will see reflected in Shadowheart's struggle her own recent crisis of faith, will understand that she is not alone in facing the terrible weight of questioning everything you have ever been taught to believe. The gauntlet of Shar has tested many would-be dark justiciars. Most have failed, their bodies and souls consumed by the trials. Some have succeeded, becoming champions of darkness and loss. But Shadowheart's trial will be different because she carries within her a truth that Shar has tried to destroy. The memory of Jenevelle Hallowleaf, the child who loved moonlight, who trusted in Selûne's guidance, who knew warmth before she knew only cold. That truth, preserved by Selûne despite everything Shar has done to erase it, is about to be offered back to its rightful owner. The Night Song. Dame Aelin revealed, and the defining choice. The cage floats in the Shadowfell's void, suspended by magic that reeks of both Shar's power and infernal engineering. Inside it stands a figure who radiates light despite being imprisoned in the domain of absolute darkness. This is Dame Aelin, though for a century she has been known only as the Night Song. Reduced from a person to an object, from a daughter of divinity to a tool used by those who would pervert the natural order. Aelin is an Aasimar, a being born from the union of divine and mortal, though her case is unique. She is not merely touched by divinity, but is the direct daughter of Selûne herself, born of the moon goddess's essence and given physical form. This makes her effectively immortal, capable of returning to life after death, her soul bound to her mother's power in ways that make her nearly impossible to permanently destroy. She is also a paladin, a holy warrior who has taken oaths to protect the innocent and fight against darkness in all its forms. Or rather, she was, before Ketheric Thorm trapped her here. Aylin's story is tragic in ways that echo across multiple lives. She was the lover of Isabel Thorm, Ketheric's daughter, a cleric of Selûne who served alongside Aylin in the fight against darkness. Their love was genuine and deep, a partnership that united them in both their sacred mission and their personal devotion to each other. They fought together against the forces of shadow, celebrated together in moments of victory, and dreamed together of a future where the shadow curse that had plagued the land might finally be lifted. But Isabel died under mysterious circumstances, her life cut short in ways that were never fully explained. Some whisper that Shar herself orchestrated the death, seeing an opportunity to corrupt Ketheric and turn a champion of Selûne into an agent of darkness. Others believe it was simply tragedy, the kind of random cruelty that afflicts even the faithful. Regardless of cause, the effect on Ketheric was absolute and devastating. Ketheric Thorm, once a devoted Selûnite general who fought against darkness with righteous fury, broke completely upon his daughter's death. He could not accept that Selûne, the goddess he had served so faithfully, would allow such suffering. He could not understand why his prayers for Isabel's return went unanswered, why the Moon Maiden who promised hope and guidance seemed to have abandoned him in his darkest hour. His grief curdled into rage, his faith inverted into hatred, and he turned to the one deity who promised that his suffering had meaning. Shar, the goddess of loss, who taught that all endings are sacred and all pain is ultimately emptiness to be embraced. Shar welcomed Ketheric's conversion with malicious joy. Here was a champion of Selûne, broken and willing to serve darkness, offering proof that hope eventually fails, and that even the most devoted can be claimed by loss. She granted him power, showed him how to use necromancy to defy the death that had taken his daughter, and made him promises about Isabel's eventual return if he would serve her faithfully. Ketheric built a temple to Shar beneath his family mausoleum, a grand structure where Sharans could gather and where the shadow curse that would later plague the region was initially seeded. But Ketheric wanted more than Shar's philosophy. He wanted true immortality, the kind that would let him endure until Isabel returned, the kind that no enemy could strip from him. This is where Aylin entered his plans. Ketheric knew that Aylin was immortal through her connection to Selûne, that she would return to life no matter how many times she was killed. He also knew that Shar despised Selûne's daughter, would take perverse pleasure in seeing her imprisoned and used. So Ketheric made a bargain. He would capture Aylin and offer her to Shar as a gift, a Selûnite champion imprisoned in the Shadowfell itself, and in exchange he would be granted the power to link his life to hers. The capture of Aylin required planning and brutality. She did not surrender easily, fought with all the divine fury that a daughter of the moon goddess could muster, but Ketheric had the element of surprise, had Sharan magic at his disposal, and was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve his goal. He lured Aylin into a trap, used ritual magic to weaken her connection to Selûne, and with the help of Balthazar the Necromancer, constructed a soul cage that would imprison her in the Shadowfell, where her mother's light could not reach her. The soul cage is a device of profound cruelty, a magical prison that not only contains Aylin's body, but links her life force to Ketheric's own. As long as she lives, as long as her immortal essence continues to cycle through death and rebirth, Ketheric cannot be permanently killed. He can be wounded, his body destroyed, but his soul will return, anchored by the connection to Aylin's immortality. The cage also serves another purpose. It makes Aylin the final test for Sharan initiates seeking to become Dark Justiciars. For a century, Aylin has been trapped in this cage, existing in a state of perpetual torment. Sharans seeking to complete their trials and become dark justiciars are brought to the Shadowfell, given the Spear of Night, and commanded to kill the Night Song. They strike her down, and because Aelin is immortal, she returns to life shortly thereafter, only to be killed again by the next would-be Dark Justiciar. She has died dozens, perhaps hundreds of times, each death a violation, each return to life a renewal of suffering. Aelin has counted every death, remembered every face of those who killed her, and maintained her sense of self through sheer force of will. Many beings would have gone mad under such treatment, would have fractured psychologically until nothing remained but instinct and rage. But Aelin is sustained by her connection to Selûne, by her love for Isabel, which persists despite death and imprisonment, and by her absolute fury at those who have done this to her. She has promised herself that if she is ever freed, she will exact vengeance on Ketheric Thorm with a wrath that will echo across the plains. Shar initially accepted Aelin's imprisonment as a gift, relishing the opportunity to torment her sister's daughter, to prove that even divine blood can be caged and humiliated. But over time, Shar came to resent the arrangement. Ketheric's use of necromancy to maintain his immortality, his defiance of natural death through Aelin's stolen life force, was not truly Sharan in philosophy. Shar teaches that loss and ending are sacred, that death should be accepted rather than cheated. Ketheric was using her domain, the Shadowfell itself, to practice a form of immortality that violated everything she represented. He had corrupted her gift, turned her temple into a tool for his own purposes, and defiled her realm with necromantic magic that was antithetical to her teachings. By the time Shadowheart and the party arrive at the Shadowfell, Shar's relationship with Ketheric has soured considerably. The goddess still maintains the prison because it serves to humiliate Selûne, still permits Sharan initiates to use Aelin as their final test, but she has begun to regret granting Ketheric such power. This divine ambivalence will play a role in what happens next, in the choice that Shadowheart must make and the consequences that follow. When Shadowheart approaches the cage, when she sees Aelin suspended in chains of light and shadow, something stirs in her that she cannot name. Aelin looks up, sees the newcomer, and speaks with a voice that carries both divine authority and very human bitterness. She invites Shadowheart to heap more sins upon your head, acknowledges that another Sharan has come to kill her, and promises that her retribution will be all the sweeter for their cruelty. Balthazar, if he is still alive and has accompanied the party to the Shadowfell, attempts to take control of the situation. He calls Aelin by her true name, commands the party to stand back so he can transport her to Ketheric, explains that she is more than a relic, but a source of immortal power that maintains the general's invulnerability. The party must decide whether to let Balthazar take Aelin, whether to fight him for control of the situation, or whether to attempt something else entirely. If the party defeats Balthazar or convinces him to leave, Shadowheart is left alone with the Night Song, with the Spear of Night in her hands, with Shar's command echoing in her mind. This is the moment that Viconia prepared her for, the culmination of decades of training and indoctrination, the trial that will elevate her to Dark Justiciar or prove her unworthy of Shar's favor. The wound on her hand throbs with anticipation, with the promise that obedience will bring relief and disobedience will bring agony beyond endurance. Shadowheart grips the Spear of Night, feels its dark power resonating with her own Sharan magic, and prepares to strike the killing blow. Aelin looks at her with something that might be pity mixed with contempt, seeing another victim of Shar's manipulation, another soul broken and reshaped to serve darkness. The moment stretches, suspended between what Shadowheart has been told to do and what some deep part of her, The part that is still Jenevelle Hallowleaf knows is wrong. This is where the player's choices become critical. Without intervention, without persuasion or alternative perspective, Shadowheart will likely kill the Night Song. Her indoctrination is too strong, her fear of Shar's punishment too great, her sense of identity too wrapped up in being the loyal servant who completes her mission regardless of cost. She will strike, Aelin will die, and Shadowheart will become Dark Justiciar, her transformation into Shar's perfect weapon complete. But if the player character intervenes, if they pass the persuasion checks, or offer Shadowheart alternative ways to think about what she is doing, doubt begins to crack through the armor of certainty. The player can point out that Aelin is imprisoned and helpless, that killing her would be murder rather than combat, that perhaps Shar's command is a test of a different kind, asking whether Shadowheart will choose mercy over obedience. They can remind Shadowheart of the moments when she showed compassion, when she helped others despite her Sharan training telling her that such actions are weakness. They can ask her what she truly wants, whether this is her choice or simply what she has been programmed to do. These arguments chip away at Shadowheart's resolve. She wavers, the spear of night trembling in her hands. The wound on her hand erupts in agony, Shar's punishment for doubt manifesting as physical torment. Shadowheart gasps in pain, nearly drops the spear, struggles to maintain her grip on both the weapon and her sense of purpose. Aelin watches this internal battle with growing understanding, recognizing perhaps that Shadowheart is not simply evil, but trapped, that she is as much a victim of Shar's cruelty as Aelin herself has been. If persuasion succeeds, if Shadowheart can be convinced to choose mercy over obedience, she makes a decision that will alter everything. She throws the Spear of Night away, casting it into the Shadowfell's void where Shared can reclaim her weapon, but where it can do no more harm. The spear falls, tumbling through darkness, and with its departure goes Shadowheart's last chance to become a Dark Justiciar through conventional means. She has rejected Shar's command, has chosen to spare life rather than take it, has put compassion above the doctrine of loss. The consequences are immediate and overwhelming. Shadowheart collapses, her hand wound burning with such intensity that she can barely remain conscious. She feels Shar's presence withdraw, feels the connection to her goddess that has defined her entire life begin to fray and break. She has been disowned, cast out, marked as a traitor to the faith that shaped her. The emptiness that Sharans are taught to embrace is now literal, a void where divine connection once existed, and it is more terrifying than any pain. But Aelin rises. The cage's power breaks with Shadowheart's choice, perhaps because Shar no longer maintains it with full strength, perhaps because the goddess recognizes that Shadowheart's rebellion has meaning that even she must acknowledge. The chains of light and shadow shatter, and Aelin transforms before their eyes, her true nature finally able to manifest. She becomes Dame Aelin in full glory, silver-armored paladin with wings of radiant light, sword blazing with Selûne's power, fury and righteousness incarnate. Aelin thanks Shadowheart for the mercy shown, acknowledges the courage it took to reject everything she had been taught, and promises that this choice will not be forgotten. She reveals something that Shadowheart did not know, could not have guessed. Shadowheart was not born to serve Shar, but was stolen from Selûne's faithful, was once a child named Jenevelle Hallowleaf, whose parents still live imprisoned in Baldur's Gate. The truth is presented not as accusation, but as gift, as information that Shadowheart deserves to know, even though it will shatter what remains of her sense of self. Shadowheart reels from this revelation, unable to process its implications fully in this moment of crisis. Aelin does not press, understands that such truths require time to accept. Instead, she spreads her wings and prepares to depart, to fly to Moonrise Towers where Ketheric awaits, to exact the vengeance she has promised herself for a century of imprisonment and murder. Before she leaves, she grants her blessing to Shadowheart, a touch of Selûne's power that helps to fill the void left by Shar's abandonment, not replacing what was lost, but offering something gentler in its place. If Shadowheart kills the Night Song instead, if she completes Shar's command and becomes a dark justiciar, the outcome is very different. Aelin dies, her body collapsing in the cage, and Shadowheart feels a surge of dark power flow through her. She has passed the ultimate test, proven her devotion beyond any doubt, and Shar rewards her accordingly. The transformation into Dark Justiciar is complete, granting Shadowheart powers that elevate her combat abilities and deepen her connection to shadow magic. But something is lost as well. Shadowheart becomes colder, more ruthless, more willing to embrace cruelty in service of her goddess. Her personality shifts toward the absolute certainty that Sharan doctrine teaches, the elimination of doubt through the elimination of everything that might cause doubt. She has become what Veconia intended, a weapon without hesitation, a champion of loss who understands that mercy is weakness, and that only absolute obedience brings freedom from suffering. This version of Shadowheart still has her story to complete, still has revelations to face about her parents and her past. But she faces them from a position of much greater commitment to Shar, making the eventual choices in Act 3 even more difficult and the potential for tragedy much higher. The killing of the Night Song also means that Ketheric remains immortal for longer, that Aelin cannot aid in the battles to come, and that Selûne loses her daughter to murder at Shar's command. The cosmic balance shifts further toward darkness, and hope becomes that much harder to maintain. For Lae'zel, witnessing either outcome provides profound insight into her own situation. If she sees Shadowheart reject Shar and choose mercy despite the cost, she recognizes a parallel to her own rejection of Vlaakith's lies. Both women were raised to serve without question. Both were betrayed by the powers they trusted. Both faced moments where they had to choose between comfortable obedience and agonizing truth. Lae'zel sees that she is not alone in this struggle, that faith can be questioned without destroying the self, that choosing differently from how one was raised is possible even when it seems impossible. If Lae'zel witnesses Shadowheart kill the Night Song and embrace her dark justiciar transformation, she sees a cautionary tale, a vision of what she might have become if Vlaakith had not betrayed her so obviously at Kresh Yelek. She sees someone who has surrendered completely to indoctrination, who has chosen certainty over doubt, even when certainty requires murder. This strengthens Lae'zel's resolve to pursue the truth about Orpheus, to reject Vlaakith despite the difficulty of doing so, because the alternative is to become like Shadowheart, powerful but hollow, certain but wrong, devoted but enslaved. The choice made in the Shadowfell ripples forward through the rest of the story, affecting Act 3's conflicts, shaping the final battle, determining which allies can be called upon and which powers can be wielded. But more importantly, it determines who Shadowheart becomes, whether she reclaims her identity as Jenevelle Hallowleaf or completes her transformation into Shadowheart the Dark Justiciar. This is not merely a tactical decision, but an existential one, a choice about whether redemption is possible or whether some transformations are too complete to be undone. And through it all, Lae'zel watches, learns, and prepares for her own final confrontations with Vlaakith's lies and Orpheus's truth. The parallel journeys of these two women, from opposite cultures and serving opposite forces, converge in this moment of choice and continue forward transformed by what happened in the Shadowfell's darkness. Epilogue: Mirrors of Faith and Freedom. The stories of Shadowheart and Lae'zel do not end in the Shadowfell or at Cresh Yelek, but those moments define everything that follows. They are the fulcrums on which their lives balance, the points where comfortable lies give way to agonizing truths. What makes their parallel journeys so compelling is not that they are identical, but that they are mirrors, reflecting each other's struggles through very different cultural and religious lenses. Both women were stolen from their true identities. Shadowheart was kidnapped as a child and transformed through systematic psychological destruction. Lae'zel was raised from birth in a culture built on propaganda and lies, her authentic self never given the chance to develop before being shaped by githyanki indoctrination. Both believed absolutely in the righteousness of their service. Both learned that the powers they trusted viewed them as tools rather than people, disposable when convenient and consumed when useful. The choice they each face is fundamentally the same choice presented in different contexts. Will you remain loyal to the system that shaped you, or will you risk everything to pursue truth, even when that truth destroys your sense of self? For Shadowheart, this choice comes when she stands before the night song, with Shar commanding one thing and her own buried conscience whispering another. For Lae'zel, it comes when Vlaakith's betrayal reveals the lies beneath githyanki society, and Voss offers an alternative that requires rejecting everything she was raised to believe. Neither choice is easy, neither choice is without cost. Shadowheart, who rejects Shar, must live with the pain of divine abandonment, must rebuild her identity from fragments of a childhood she cannot fully remember, must confront her parents as the woman who tortured them without knowing who they were. Lae'zel, who rejects Vlaakith, becomes an outcast from her own people, must fight against warriors she once would have called comrades, must accept that the githyanki empire she was raised to serve is built on betrayal and must be torn down if her people are ever to be truly free. But these costs are the price of authenticity, the necessary suffering that comes from choosing truth over comfort. And both women, if guided toward the path of rebellion rather than obedience, discover something unexpected. Freedom is more valuable than certainty, even when freedom is painful and certainty is comfortable. They learn that being true to oneself, even when that self is still forming, even when that self is broken and needs to be rebuilt, is better than being a perfect weapon in someone else's hand. Their stories remind us that faith is not the same as obedience, that questioning does not equal betrayal, that changing one's mind when presented with new evidence is strength rather than weakness. They show that even the most complete indoctrination can be overcome if the victim is willing to endure the pain of awakening, that no transformation is so total that the original self is completely destroyed, that hope persists even in the darkest prisons. As you drift toward sleep, consider these two warriors, one born to moonlight and stolen into shadow, one born into lies and struggling toward truth. Consider how their choices echo choices we all face, perhaps in less dramatic forms, but no less meaningful. When the systems we trust betray us, when the authorities we relied upon prove corrupt, when the certainties we built our lives around crumble, we too must choose whether to cling to comfortable fictions or embrace difficult truths. Shadowheart and Lae'zel, so different in origin and culture, so opposed in their initial beliefs, find common ground in their willingness to question and their courage to choose differently. Their friendship, if it develops, is built on shared suffering and mutual recognition that they are both survivors of systems designed to destroy individuality in service of control. They see in each other both who they were and who they might become, mirrors reflecting both past pain and future possibility. But here's the final twist that brings everything full circle, the revelation that makes their connection even more profound than either of them realizes. Shadowheart was kidnapped from a Selûnite family and transformed into a weapon of Shar. Lae'zel was born into a culture that worships Vlaakith, unaware that Vlaakith's entire claim to power rests on the imprisonment of her people's rightful heir. The artifact Shadowheart carries, stolen from githyanki forces and protected by her Sharan training, contains the very person whose freedom would destroy the lie that governs Lae'zel's entire civilization. Think about the layers of irony here. Shar orchestrated the theft of an artifact from githyanki forces, not knowing that freeing its prisoner would strike at another tyranny built on lies and hidden truths. Vlaakith imprisoned Orpheus to hide her betrayal of Gith, never imagining that enemies of her people would steal his prison and potentially expose everything. The cosmic enemies Shar and Selûne, locked in eternal war since creation itself, both play unwitting roles in a drama that neither goddess fully controls. And at the center of it all are two women who were supposed to be weapons, supposed to perpetuate the systems that shaped them. Shadowheart was supposed to become a dark justiciar, proof that Shar could corrupt even children raised in Selûne's light. Lae'zel was supposed to be the perfect soldier, faithful unto death to a queen who would eventually devour her soul. Instead, they meet on a beach, forced together by circumstance, and begin questioning everything they've been taught to believe. The gods work in mysterious ways, or perhaps they don't work at all. Perhaps it's just mortals making choices, breaking cycles, refusing to be the weapons their creators intended them to be. Perhaps that's the real magic. Not divine intervention, but two women who were designed to perpetuate ancient hatreds, choosing instead to see the suffering they share and the freedom they both deserve. Their stories continue beyond this point, into Act 3, where Shadowheart may confront her parents and Lae'zel may stand with or against Orpheus when he's finally freed. But the fundamental transformation has already occurred. They've already made the choices that matter most. They've already proven that no indoctrination is absolute, that no transformation is irreversible, that even when the entire weight of gods and empires presses down on you, you can still choose differently. That's the real lesson hidden in their parallel journeys. Freedom isn't given by gods or granted by queens. It's claimed by those brave enough to question, to doubt, to choose truth over comfort. It's seized by those willing to endure the pain of becoming themselves instead of remaining comfortable as weapons in someone else's hand. And so we close this chapter of their tale, having traced their journeys from the ravaged beach to the Shadowfell, from absolute certainty to profound doubt, from servitude to the possibility of freedom. The foundations have been laid, the choices made, the paths determined. What remains is to walk those paths to their conclusions, to see what kind of people these two women become when finally given the chance to choose for themselves rather than simply obey. Thank you for joining me on this journey through darkness and light, through lies and truth, through faith and doubt. If you enjoyed exploring the depths of Baldur's Gate 3's lore through the lens of these two remarkable companions, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. There are countless other stories waiting to be told from the Forgotten Realms, countless other characters whose journeys deserve this kind of careful, soothing exploration. Until next time, may you find your own path between shadow and moonlight. May you question what deserves questioning, and may you choose truth even when lies are easier. Sleep well, dreamers. The stars and shadows both await your return.